None. I don't want no coupons. Codes.
All right, commissioners, it is now 1:00. We are now live on YouTube.
Thank you, Monica, and good afternoon, commissioners and staff and community. This is a budget work session today, May 27th, 2021, and I will read the public charge. The Board of Commissioners asks its members and citizens to conduct themselves in a respectful, courteous manner, both with the board and fellow citizens. At any time, should any member of the board or any citizen fail to observe this public charge, the chair will ask the offending person to leave the meeting until that individual regains personal control. Should decorum fail to be restored, the chair will recess the meeting until such time that a genuine commitment to the public charge is observed. And as a courtesy, which I forget a lot of times, is if we could silence our phones. So I'm going to turn this over to our interim county manager, Hager, and she's going to take us through this first item, and she will manage the other items here. This is for our budget.
All right, good afternoon, commissioners and staff and others. I will give you an update on ARPA funding, and this will be a continuation of a conversation we've had over the past couple of months. As you know, the guidance on ARPA funding has been updated, and it continues and will continue to be updated in upcoming months. And so this is a snapshot where we are right now. We'll give the board some framework information as we have future discussions and talk a little bit about our next steps. So this again will be quick highlights. All right, next slide. As a reminder, for Durham County government, the allocation for the ARPA funds are $62.4 million, and we will receive half of that allocation this year and within June, and we will receive the second half of the funds next year. Next slide. These are some key dates, and they are changing. As a matter of fact, as we were trying to update the slides, I pulled some information up, and then Deborah was in a meeting a few days earlier and it had already changed. So this just shows how fluid it is. So right now, counties can register and request the funds. There's a deadline to submit comments to the U.S. Treasury about the interim rules. Deadlines for counties to submit their interim report is in August, and you see the other dates. The funds must be incurred and obligated by December 31st, 2024, and funds must be expended to cover obligations and all work must be completed by 2026. And so just for clarification there, let's say a particular project is initiated in October of 2024, as long as we have a purchase order and a contract for that particular process, we can continue to expend the funds as long as they happen before 2026. So that nuanced guidance is one that has been updated as well. So we just want you to know how things are looking at this point. Okay, next slide. The 5 primary ways that the funds can be used outside of lost revenue is to support public health response, address negative impacts economically, replace public sector revenue loss, address premium pay for essential workers, and also look at water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. And then when looking at these various categories and conversations that the boards have talked about, all of the initiatives that have been discussed so far will fit in these categories. In addition to the PowerPoint, there are two more detailed documents that are included that will give lots of examples. So as communities are trying to determine background, as communities are trying to determine, well, how can we optimize use of these funds? It is great the federal government has fleshed out many examples, which makes the process much easier when trying to vet dollar usage. Next slide, please. As shared, there's guidance coming from so many different directions, and this one I put in here because it comes from the GFOA, which is the Governmental Financial Office Association. And there were a few bullets I thought may be great highlights to reminder, and many that have also come from the NACO as well as the state organizations. But take time and have careful consideration on the funds use. That's one that would encourage. Make sure you dedicate your grants and programs first whenever possible, and save ARPA fund priorities not eligible for federal and state assistance program. And this is one of those timing issues. As we shared, we've had some very, very preliminary conversations on some of the categories. But as we've had them, we've seen how the state and or federal government has actually allocated dollars in those areas. So timing wise, it's good as best as possible to gauge, well, what's happening at the state, what's happening at the feds, and trying to coordinate the local dollars in a way that we aren't missing out on those opportunities. I won't go through all of these, but adequate time should be taken to carefully consider all alternatives for the prudent use of ARPA funding prior to committing the resources to ensure that the best use of the temporary funding occurs. Next slide, please. And this is something that, we kept in the forefront with the CARES funding. And of course, all the guidance with this as well. Compliance has to remain in the forefront of project development to ensure procurement and contractual obligations align with uniform grant guidelines, making sure that good records are in place and supportive documentation for compliance. And the ARPA funds will be reported in our single audit annually. And so we always like to remind everyone of that, because when situations happen, they don't comply, that means that the local dollars have to replace that funding amount. Next slide. Now, there have been some conversations about potential guiding principles, and it's not a complete list. This is just to give you some understanding of conversations that have happened thus far. And the board will have a chance to talk about these in greater details later on in other conversations. Prior to, we came up with a few, and these align with much of what was directed either at the state or national level. Prioritization given to funding priorities that support the board's strategic and capital plans and other assessments endorsed by the board. Consideration to leverage ARPA funds from federal, state, and local community to optimize overall allocations. Prioritization given to funding that address equity, including health disparities, closing the achievement gap, infrastructure support to support unincorporated areas, funding to support minority-owned business. Evaluate infrastructure needed to address compliance, increased workloads resulted from COVID, and also those work areas in human services, public safety, and administrative operations. Also making sure there's an established framework for community discussions and input, as well as coordinating those discussions with our community partners. With the city, Durham Public Schools, and the county receiving these dollars, to the extent that we can do some coordinating of our conversations, that would be great. And making sure that we have accommodations for our non-English speaking residents and those who are hard of hearing to the extent that we can. City and County of Durham staff have been collaborating to the extent that we can on an engagement infrastructure, and we'll share some of that information in upcoming weeks and months. As you know, all of the funds came right and guidance during budget season, which is one of the toughest thing for a budget and finance team to try to evaluate while analyzing the current budget. And so once we finish with the budget for the current year, we will spend more time focusing on some of the nuanced components that need to occur. But we did want to at least share some preliminaries or framework issues. Next slide, please. County expenses that can be reimbursed through FEMA should be limited on ARPA funds. And again, that helps to make sure that we free up the dollars to address community-facing issues. And if it is a chance to reimburse from FEMA, because there are some large ticket items that we have covered through CARES funding, such as our housing and some other areas, as long as we can use FEMA, we will do that. But there may be situations that FEMA, especially for the housing, they may or may not do it the entire time. So we may have to shift between funding streams to handle it. Identify specific one-time projects and or a sustainability strategy for initiatives that require funding beyond 1 year. For an example, we may start off funding a particular area with ARPA, and we know it's a reoccurring expense. And so in years 2 and 3, there should be a strategy to slowly transition ARPA funds off of that particular project and increase the local dollars so that when we get to year 4, there isn't a large price tag. So ideally, there will be one-time projects, but there may be situations that we need reoccurring projects, but we just need to make sure we have a strategy for that. And then the last one, establishing a rubric to evaluate and rank projects to ensure optimal and highest use of funds are achieved. Next slide. Grant compliance, and I may have talked about this one already, but it needs to stay in the forefront, but I must have put it in twice. And so we can go to the next slide. In the current budget, we did allocate some dollars for ARPA fund use, and these are similar areas that we funded through CARES. The janitorial contracts for increased building cleaning. We talked about that in the budget retreat and is in the recommended budget. Dollars for security, for screening, for COVID, and for revenue losses. We've budgeted an amount of about $408,000. And then for court facility fee revenue losses of $260,000. So right now we're identifying about $2.9 million in ARPA funding. Next slide. Now these are some areas, we have an add delete list of things. There is an item that we may use ARPA funds, but we may use a fund balance or a different approach for it, is the non-congregate housing for the next 6 months. That is something we'll bring to the board at the June work session, and we'll flesh out which strategy we'll do for that. And the duplex for the housing as well is represented there. And then the vaccine equity proposal, that's another place that we would potentially propose to the board to use. And then the next slide, please. Now, this is an example list of areas, and it's that we've talked about either in budget discussions or the board may have mentioned, or in the recommended budget, we said, hey, we can use ARPA funds for this particular area. You see the list, but I'll read through a few of them. Funds to support the DSS grant relief for long-term homeowners at or below 30% AMI. In the current budget, we have an amount of $750,000 allocated for that. And what we said, we will look at patterns and adjust the budget with the full amount using ARPA dollars or fund reserves, but ARPA dollars are appropriate for that expense. So that's one example. There's been lots of conversation about behavioral health and that infrastructure for mental health, behavioral health, and other areas. And so again, another example, and there's been lots of investments I know that communities are making in that space, workforce development, business community support, and with the workforce development, there have been conversations as well as some commitments preliminary in the budget. Durham Technical Community College, they have an aggressive program and initiative that they're implementing and desire additional funding. For the business community support, there were partnerships, as you know, with CARES funding, with grant programs, as well as loan programs. And that was jointly a process between the city and the county of Durham. So there are places that we do see collaboration as a natural continuum of what happened with CARES funding. But as we vet these different projects a little later, I am sure you will see some partnerships emerging. We've talked a little bit about housing insecurity, but food insecurity is another one. Pre-K and K-12 initiatives, broadband support. This is one that has been a board priority for years. There's funding being allocated from the federal government to support that. The General Assembly is also prioritizing it. I just got an update that I know the House approved a $750 million budget to support this particular issue for the state. So trying to make sure we coordinate and leverage our dollars in a way that covers a gap that's not being met by the state or feds. And this one, we talked about before about the infrastructure and the infrastructure support, and potentially if it's determined that we may need incentives for our public safety or our nurses or those in those high areas of turnover, this may be a place to do that because of COVID. Next slide, please. Okay, reminders and next step, this is the last slide. Federal and state guidance on ARPA allocations will continue for months to come. We are, as well as the state and nation, are awaiting Biden's infrastructure plan as it relates to ARPA funds. And you know, there's a huge investment that is being outlined in his plan. And so we're waiting to see what all those details are for those as well. A few time-sensitive projects that require summer funding will be presented during one of the board meetings in June. The food insecurity area is one. I know there are a couple of other proposals that are out there that we'll bring to the board. We'll do another update. It'll be quick at the June 24th meeting. And at that time, we'll talk a little bit about the engagement strategy. Staff will also present a rubric for board discussion to evaluate and rank projects at a future meeting too. We're still sorting through all the information, so that may come a little bit later, but we'll keep you posted there. And the final bullet, you know, we just need to make sure we have a process develop on how the county receives, reviews, and awards and monitors funding to outside agencies and residents. And this is so important. The compliance reviews are so rigorous. And when awarding these grants or proposals, we just need to make sure the partner entities can do the required compliance components to make sure that we aren't having on the back end to repay those dollars. And so that's all I have for this part of the discussion. But again, it was to give the board some update and let them know about some of the draft concepts that we were we're doing. And once we get past the budget, we can put additional attention around it. And again, I'd like to thank the GMs, the budget staff, and finance folks all for helping pull these highlights together. And we'll entertain any questions.
Mr. Jacobs?
Well, thank you so much, Claudia. I really, really appreciate this presentation and all the information that you have laid out. In terms of the draft guiding principles, I really like a lot of the principles that you've laid out for us. And you and I had a phone conversation about this as well. But I guess two other ones that I would suggest for consideration is one that's related, and you kind of referenced it really in your comments, but just coordination, possible coordination with the city and with Durham Public Schools around any identified, mutually identified priorities or projects, knowing that we have this incredible opportunity to do some transformative things. And if we pool our resources around certain things, something like the broadband, if we decided that one of our goals as a community was, for instance, that every person, and I don't know what the measurement would be, would have access to a certain type of broadband, and then how each of us could play a role in that. But that would take, obviously, that type of collaboration and coordination to do that. The second thing that looking at the rubric for how, the other thing that I would suggest is also, again, I know some of the guidance that I've read has been like suggesting that communities focus on, 4 or 5 really, really big things, and not just, to really kind of prioritize. And so I really like the idea of the rubric. The other suggestion I have is that we come up with measurable goals. Again, these could be community-wide. So for instance, if we wanted to focus on, workforce development, and again, this is something we could partner with the city on, and thinking about the Bulls initiative, like our goal is that we're going to increase the number of Durham residents who get jobs in the life science field by this amount. So, and just can be like one measure, but just something that that articulates what we're trying to do and that we're holding ourselves accountable for, and that we can then celebrate because we're going to achieve it. So those are just two suggestions about possible additions to that kind of guiding framework, guiding principle framework. And then I had a question. What's being recommended for ARPA funding in our budget, are any of those things reimbursable by FEMA? Possibly, like the janitorial services or the screening. At this point, are they?
Well, they are reimbursable. They are certain large ticket items we said we would possibly do with the ARPA funding. And so, because if we don't do it with ARPA funding, that means that would be 2.9 million that we would have to do through local dollars. And so part of it was balancing at this juncture, because it was directly COVID, what we can stop doing now or what we may have to transition later. And so that was the rationale with it, because there were some things that we did not include in the budget that that we will ask FEMA to reimburse us for. Because as you may recall through CARES funding, there was a lot of dollars that we allocated for additional staffing support in public health and for temps and overtime and those kinds of things. So those things we will seek FEMA reimbursement when they are directly aligned because of the COVID requirements. So, so quite a bit is still in the budget, but for those, as we were trying to balance the budget, we couldn't close the gap without putting more pressure on the tax base.
Got it. Thank you. And then my last question is, and you also kind of referred to it, is that there's so much money now that's coming in also through the state.
Mhm.
That's federal money, right? And then we've got opportunities now with the state budget. Do you feel like you need, that we have enough staff to really, it almost feels like you need a team, and it may even be like a city county DPS team, but like keeping track of all these opportunities.
Sure.
You know, and I know you all are so, have so much going on, whether you feel like you have the support for, and almost like, there almost feels like there needs to be one person who's just like keeping track of all these opportunities. Just wondering what you're thinking about that.
Well, that's a great point. And we did, in one of the questions, somewhat respond to that. Part of it is a coordinated effort between the various specialized areas. So for instance, in compliance, we do have a team of folk who are looking at the guidelines, dollars that are coming through, and making sure everyone is complying like they need to, and communicating and coordinating with the department so that they set up things properly, or external vendors. And so, but then there are the nuanced components that happen with the dollars announcements that come out. And so that is coordinated. And we sometimes get it many different times. And so there are sets of eyes looking on it. So when broadband comes through, Deborah stays on top of the announcements, and it's farmed out. Plus there are at least 2 or 3 other folks that are in human services or within, like I said, compliance, that are also seeing these allocations. But to your point, that's one of the infrastructure components that we need to slow down and look at more carefully. From my perspective, because the state will also play a role with making sure they coordinate from DHHS to public health or to DSS. We know some of that coordination, or from the state emergency operations to the local emergency management operations. So from the state, we know that coordination will happen. So, but it is one that we need to firm up. And from my perspective, it is making sure that we have the right support in those departments, because the workloads that are required to ensure you have seamless compliance is there. And so anyway, so to your point, yes, we do need to look at it. Could one person do it? It would probably be difficult, but we do need more coordination. And so that's something that we will look at even further to formalize it better. But to the point of, could we use someone that just does grants? It may be tricky, but that's something that we just needed to explore a little bit more. Yeah.
So Claudia, let me ask you a question in that regard. And you may not know yet with around the city's guidelines. Do you know if the guidelines are the same for the city as they are for the county? We have different departments.
Right.
So I'm just, when we talk about combining that, I'm just wondering, do we have the same guidelines for the city as we do for the county?
That's a great point. The overall ARPA guidelines are the same. The guiding principles, the draft ones that we did, they, I'm sure, will come up with some guiding principles, but I am sure because we're Durham, we will have many that are similar. And just because of the partnerships and the communications that have been informally happening now, although it's a whole lot, it's like I feel like it's a tsunami of emails that come in about ARPA.
Oh.
And like I said, we're doing budgets, so we're coordinating all these things, but we still are just sort of touching bases to make sure the city and the county are pacing along the same. I know the city, they are in an engagement participatory budget exercise right now. And so they're doing their budget as well as that. And I think we all just waiting to make sure we get to a stopping point, and then we can do some coordination where it makes sense. By virtue of the city dollars being allocated for certain infrastructure areas that counties do not do, there will be some differences, but there will be, I'm sure, opportunities that are very similar as well.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Burns?
Thank you, Claudia, as always. Again, I'm happy to see a presentation about ARPA that is focused toward the county as opposed to many of the spatial ones that we get in our avalanche of emails. What I will say is I want to go back to one of the points that you made. And the one that I drew in on probably the most was we need to make sure that we are focusing this funding on things that the state will not be adding grants, not totally, but that the state won't be focusing grant funding on. So as we sit here and we say that we want to have, a team of people from the city and the school board and the county, I don't have an issue with a roundtable. I don't have an issue with us working with other people, but I do want to just be very focused on the fact that we all have very different goals. The ultimate goal is so that everybody in Durham can live, work, and play in a safe place, in an open place, and that it works for everybody. I get that. But we still, as different bodies, have different charges. And there are certain bodies that have more money than we do. And like you said, the city right now has a certain amount of their money that's encumbered. And the schools do too. I know that there's certain things in theirs that they have to spend money on. So in the conversations that we've been having as we go to budget, everybody's asking, well, you can use ARPA money for this and you can use ARPA money for that. I just want each of us to be cognizant of the fact that we have to be very focused on the top few things. And I'll actually echo the sentiments that were made by Commissioner Jacobs about what we spend it on. And also say to our colleague, you have this, spend it here, as opposed to taking the 60 that we have to spend for other things. And I would also say that if we're going to be engaging in that type of conversation, the state does need to be brought in. I think everyone on this call can agree that we all care about workforce development. I've seen each person on here in their own right make very, very good suggestions about how we can improve in workforce development. And I have some ideas and some proposals that I'd like to put forward before all of this is over. But we also know that a lot of workforce development work is done at the community college level. And we need that funding, and we need to be able to get butts in the seats to get that funding, because President Buxton doesn't always get to use everything that he has. But what did the governor do this week? He put out $51.4 million just for that effort. And so that gear grant money. So as we're trying to figure out, well, what do we want to do as Durham County? I want to make sure that, somebody like a JB Buxton is in, so we know how much is he getting out of that 51.4. As we sit here and we talk about affordable housing, the governor's recommendation is that 575 million go to affordable housing. Okay, if they're going to do an allocation, much like they did in Senate Bill 172, or House Bill 166, 167 or 169, there might be a direct allocation. So as we're sitting here and saying, oh, we need to have teams, there are recommendations being made at the state level about how much is going to go to maybe this community college or how much we're going to put into affordable housing. And so if that is there, we don't need to have that funding bumping up against each other. Right. You know what I'm saying? So those are things, I know your team is looking at it. The Justice Center did a really great presentation yesterday on ARPA funds. And they did and I'll send it to everybody because now somebody sent it to me. They went over the governor's recommendations for ARPA, and then they went over what counties should do. So we all know that Treasury has given us not limitless guidelines around what we can do, but after we saw how CARES Act funding went through the General Assembly and that first tranche did, and it was pretty much torn up by a lot of these Republican General Assemblies, they've given counties carte blanche, and some of it's lack leadership. And I just don't want us to lack some of that coordination and some of that leadership. So I don't mind to go back to the broadband discussion. I actually like that one. We've all been on calls with some of our neighbors in Bahama and Rougemont, and the calls can't even go through. We were actually at a regular session meeting, and that gentleman couldn't even do his public comment. And so as we seek to look out there, Durham, while we think about the city, those parts of our county are rural. There are chunks in there just for broadband, and then specifically for rural broadband, and that's like $1.5 billion. And I've tried to reach out to folks at the governor's office and say, hey, would Bahama or Rougemont be eligible for that? And the answer right now is yes. So if the answer right now is yes, we might not need to throw out, if we're doing 2/3, can y'all do a third? So I just want to throw all those things out as we're talking about how we can pull from the city and the county. We also need to be looking at the state and saying, hey, how much are you all going to put in? We have 300 million, but you have 6 billion. So how are you going to use your 6 billion to help us? So I do like the idea about the goals. I echo that, because we could all sit here and say, let's put 600,000 here, 500 here. I like having big goals, but I also think that there's some small projects that we could throw money in that might be game changing for populations that we're not even thinking about. So I do like listing goals, but to the extent that we can, and I feel like the public would understand this, let's set something aside, because I can promise you there are going to be some outcomes from this pandemic that none of us can think of right now. So those are just my thoughts, but I do echo some of the sentiments that were made by Commissioner Jacobs, and I'll stop there.
Okay, great. I will make one quick comment. The comments that you made about, for instance, the workforce development are the types of conversations we're having.
Right.
So we talked to President Buxton, and we talked about the Durham PAC and the dollars that are used from the sales taxes, looking at, well, what that capacity is. And now that the state has just passed the bill to put an infusion of dollars for Pell Grant recipients, if that apportioned amount of funding is not needed, that then frees up what's allocated for the Durham PAC. And I'm saying it wrong, but y'all know what I'm talking about. So these are very sort of integrated.
You know exactly what you're talking about.
And then there was also some discussion from President Buxton about looking at what they get so that they can also leverage their dollars. And so that was an exciting conversation in trying to figure out, well, how do we close this gap? And I know we'll talk about that next week, but and those smaller informal discussions are happening with some other like some partnerships in other areas between city, county staff, or wherever it may be, but very, very, very informally, because we know there is a long list of where there may be desired priorities, but at least we are trying to do some very preliminary kinds of what if scenarios, so that later on when the dust settles, we have a better understanding where the state dollars stop and where there may be gaps and how we can partner. So I just want to let you know, we're trying to work in that direction.
I believe you, Claudia, I promise.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, Claudia, you want to move on to the next item?
So the-
Commissioner Carter got a hand up.
Heidi, are you raising your hands or are you having a moment?
I was raising both hands and having moments. You know how it goes. I was having a moment because I'm so excited about this presentation and all the information that we have gotten that gives, I'm sure all of us a really strong sense of security about going forward. And Claudia's summary, I thought, was just, perfect about how it's critical that we have a very clear process for how to receive, review, award, and monitor the funding. And so, I know that will take time for our staff to put together, but it's great that that's what they're working towards. I love the guiding principles. I agree with a lot of what Wendy and Naimashina have expressed about their reaction to the presentation, their thoughts on going forward. I would support everything that they have said. Let's see, one question that I have is related to process in a sense. I understand that the funds have to be expended and completed by 12/26, incurred and obligated by 12/24. I totally get that it's important for us to be careful in how we make our decisions and be sure we're guided, by our own principles, but also input from the community, and they're working on a framework for that, which is fantastic. What I don't get is the deadline for applying, or are we up against any kind of a time crunch? When you see the 12/26, 12/24, it feels like not really.
No.
But how do we apply? Do we have to have our plan in place, or we just say, oh yeah, we're this type of community and you have this much funding for us and we want it, so send it our way?
So it's a simple process for the applying of the funds. And we're still clarifying all the reporting and all of that goes along with it. We will have to show some, I'm sure, broad guidelines of framework on how to be used. The first tranche will be half of it, and with the additional coming. So, but we can firm up better in the next discussion what that looks like. I know there is some concern as far as timing and pace, especially for those larger, more complex potential projects. So, during our next conversation, we'll try to give more clarity on that part. I know for CARES, it was more complex because it came through the state and you had to submit your plan first. And so it was just a different process. So, but we will try to see what guidance is there for that piece of it. And
Claudia, is it
yeah.
something like we say, okay, our first tranche is $31 million. Go ahead and send it to us. We're filling out this paperwork, and then it just goes into a fund, fund balance or fund, or until we're ready to spend it.
Well, so they will, yes, that's what will happen. And basically, they'll just once we request it, they'll send us the full amount.
Okay.
And then from there, it sits in an account, a separate account, and we, as we use it, that's when we submit our paperwork and can transfer the dollars actually into our budget. So the accounting of it will work similar to CARES, but they will send it all to us, but it has to stay in that holding account until we internally determine how it's used. So.
Okay.
Yeah.
That sounds great. And I really want to thank everybody who's participated in putting together this presentation and masterminding this. That's what it's going to require. And I'm glad we have such great masterminds working on it. Thank you.
I think Susan's got something to add. Go ahead, Susan.
Yeah. Just to add to that, with CARES Act, we had to go through NC Pro. We don't have to do that this time. We're one of the entities that we can go directly to the federal treasurer and request the funding. And that's because it's allocated to us. It is our funding. And then we have to make sure, which is so important, that we have the compliance resources to make sure that we're compliant as it relates to how we can use the funds. And we need to make sure that we do so appropriately. So that level of control and monitoring is key. And we've already established a separate bank account so that we can keep the funds separate. That they don't need to be in a separate fund, but they need to be in their own separate bank account so the interest earnings are spent for the same purpose as well. So we've got everything in place, just ready to go.
Thanks. Thank you.
Commissioner Howardson, I told Lateo,
Yeah.
I said I didn't have
Commissioner
another
Burns, go
question,
ahead.
but I do have a question. It's Commissioner Carter's fault because she said deadline. So we had the workforce development meeting today, and I was waiting for something to open. Long story short, for some of you all that are on city county, we had a presentation by Kevin Dick a while ago, right? And as he was talking to the city and Andre Pettigrew and talking to us, because he gave out the grant funds for small business when CARES Act came through, he made a presentation saying that now what we have to do is pivot, because you have so many companies now. Okay, I don't do this, I start making hand sanitizer, or we don't work here, or just people got laid off and they started a business. So how do we start to pivot? Now, I'm saying all that to say, we already know that some of the funding, Claudia's pointed it out, we've been given guidance that we do need to work with small business some. Well, guess what opened up yesterday? That $100 million that we were talking about on that call opened up late last night. So SBA is doing right. And so, right. So here's the thing, in the event that somebody, and this goes back to the coordination piece, if somebody like, and I don't want to say anybody's name, let's just say that somebody that we have worked with in the past, or maybe the city, let's just say Andre Pettigrew, or maybe or Andy Miracle, if they apply for this, it's $1 million to $5 million. Like that's how much it is. So the municipality or the nonprofit could essentially win $1 million to $5 million. And the community navigators basically provide the technical assistance so that your small businesses can pivot. It's 2 years. That's $2 million that we won't have to use our funds for. The city won't have to use it. So I'm saying all that to say there might be some opportunity there, to Claudia's point about let's make sure any direct grant funds that are possible for us, we don't allocate any of our ARPA funding there. And then it also goes back to my phone would be the one to go off to High Commissioner Carter's point.
It was mine.
We never know when these things are going to open up. This opened up last night. So I'm watching it, you're watching it. And I think, we should, there should be some data dumping going on, but we don't know who might apply for this, but that might be, because I know I will be focused on some of our small businesses, because we've gotten the presentations on how many we've lost. DDI just told us how much we lost downtown. And I remember when Lisa said, it blew me away, because I didn't even think about how much we lost downtown. And outside of Durham. So just some thoughts to think about. We're saying all of this, but applications are open every day, issues pop up, and maybe we do need to have some coordination around this. And that might be a space where we get $2 million to help our small business. And then that frees up $2 million for us. That was my way of saying, Claudia, I'm gonna call you tomorrow tonight, and Susan and Keith, and we're gonna talk about this application that just opened up. What that really was. But okay.
All right. Any other questions, concerns? Okay, Claudia, you want to move to the next item?
Sure. The next discussion will be about the vaccination proposal to look at community health workers, and the public health director, Rodney Jenkins, and Joanne will share on this particular item.
Good afternoon. Oh, we talked at the same time. I'm actually going to hand it over to Director Jenkins. I just wanted to say good afternoon to the board, to Manager Hager, and to the Attorney Darby. And Director Jenkins is here, so I'm glad to turn it over to him. Thank you.
Good afternoon, commissioners, Attorney Darby, general managers, interim manager Hager. I have been asked to just weigh in on the vaccine equity proposal, and I know have talked to some of you individually, and there's been a number of different topics around this proposal. Full disclosure, I have, as a part of the Recovery and Renewal Task Force, I did have a conversation with Mayor Schul. I was one of many to include Kate Galbraith, Matisha Sims, who were co-chairs of the Recovery and Renewal Task Force, Phil Harewood, CEO of Lincoln Community Health Center, and a couple of others. Of course, we think any initiative that's going to help to promote the vaccine and equitably distribute the vaccine is a good thing. I have told some of you privately that this is complementing a number of different things that we're already doing, to include our individual efforts here at the Department of Public Health, and also to include those initiatives that are currently ongoing with the state through the Department of Health and Human Services. To expound on that a little bit more, we do have a current contract with our vendor OptumServe, who has been providing great service in the form of COVID-19 testing. And then they flipped to do COVID-19 vaccinations. They will now have their contract possibly extended up until September. And then they will also be able to assist us with promoting the vaccine upon demand. So what do I mean by that? If there are vaccine requests for to host events or whatever have you, then they will go on site, do a site survey, and they will in turn also provide vaccinations as well. So I truly do believe that we cannot have too many partners or whatever, but of concern to me was just the ability to herd the cats, if you will. If you have so many different people doing a number of different things, you know, we don't want to overstep each other. So I was encouraged at the revised proposal by Mayor Schuh, in which there is going to be sort of a coordinated effort in the form of, as he's describing it, sort of a Durham Vaccine Equity Coalition. And that will probably be instrumental in helping us to coordinate our efforts. And I know the expectation would be for myself and maybe Katie Galbraith, Duke Regional, to participate and be main players on that stage. With the infusion of funds, I think it's asking for $650,000 for the city, $650,000 for the county. You know, I'm a big proponent of local stimulus packages, if you will. And of course, that is an opportunity for us to put dollars in the pockets of our residents who are trusted community ambassadors from different neighborhoods to be able to promote the vaccine. I don't have to tell you how we're doing because I think I just said it on Monday, but we are at a very, very good point in our vaccine response. There's still a lot of work to be done with the African-American community. But again, as Commissioner Burns has eloquently said a couple of times, we have had a long and sordid tradition of having vaccine issues with penetrating the African-American community, and nothing has necessarily changed other than the fact that it's free and it's we're trying to make it a lot more readily available. I know you guys have a tight timeline, but I just wanted to kind of weigh in and kind of be here, be present to answer any questions you may have as it relates to this topic. And
I have, thank you, Rod, and I have just 2 points. One, around the health equity piece or health inequity piece, that there's conversation obviously around ARPA funds and the CARES funding, and that conversation around health equity across whether our state or countries, that we certainly are not going to be able to ARPA or CARE funds our way out of this issue or situation, because where we saw there was the COVID disparities, whether it was around infection and death rates, and then the vaccination rates, that's where we see the food deserts and the education deserts and opportunity deserts. And so coalitions and looking at cross systems collaborations are going to be the key. And then of course, examining how and why and getting more proximate to the situation and the issue. So I had to say that piece. And then another piece that Director Jenkins did not mention on this in this meeting is that our Durham County Department of Public Health is the recipient of a NACO award, I believe. And he might be able to tell you about that a little bit. I just wanted to kind of toot the entire team's horn. Thank you.
Thank you so much, General Manager Pearson. Yes, we have been the recipient of an award, and I'm trying not to blush too hard. But
And how much?
how much?
Yeah. It's like,
Well, I'll just say, you know, it's not an amount, but you know, some monetary assets would be good. But so proud of the collaboration between IS&T. You know, I don't want to say names because I know I'll get in trouble, but as the press release did say, you know, early on, we wanted to make sure that when we were able to, when that denominator was more than 500, as not to identify anyone, we wanted to make sure that we put up a platform that allowed for clear, easy to follow data to be presented to our residents in a forward-facing manner that would allow them to remain safe, that would allow them to have access to resources, not just data, but knowing where they could go for food, where they could go for housing resources. And that one-stop shop, which I like to call the crown jewel of our response, was the data dashboard. So proud of the collaboration that went into really painstakingly putting that thing together and having it forward-facing for some 12 months now. I'm just proud of it. And again, we're certainly grateful to you all for the support. And we're grateful for NACO, the National Association of Counties, to recognize us for that award. So,
And please pardon me, that was certainly a collaborative effort. IS&T and Public Health, thank you so much. And the other departments, thank you so much.
So we certainly are going to say toot to toot our own horn.
well, congratulations to you and your team, Joanne and Rod. Thank you so much for the work, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. You're right. It takes a lot of work and it takes leaders. So thank you for bringing that to Durham County. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I do have one quick question for you around the proposal. Number 4, it talks about the city would issue an RFP. So could you talk about that a little bit as to what that means for the proposal?
From what I could ascertain, Madam Chair and members of the board, the city wanted to issue an RFP for an administrator to be someone who would be the conveyor of the funds to make sure that certain deliverables were checked off, and to ensure that you know, the coalition was able to function fully, and that the main programmatic thrust of this initiative would be fulfilled.
So that's just for an administrator, but the funding would go to an identified entity that you've already identified?
Yes, ma'am. To me, from what I got from it, you know, the RFP would be administered, and then, of course, there were provisions made for various administrative and operating costs that would be lumped into it. That was my take from what I read, Madam Chair.
Yeah, just a little, just gives me a little bit of pause when there's been so much conversation around my board about RFP, and when we start giving away money without doing an RFP, then it causes for a little bit of concern for me. And so that was my only question there.
Chair Howerton, we certainly can get additional information about that.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Questions, comments, other board members? Commissioner Burns?
I won't beat a dead horse. I just want to echo your sentiments around the fact that we do need to make sure, you know, I've made my concerns very clear about process, and other people have written 4-page letters about how they want to adhere to the process. So just know that I, along with the community, will be holding you to that standard. On top of that, I'm all about, investing locally. Oddly enough, the fiscal agent mentioned is not local to Durham. But for me, I just want to make sure I don't see myself holding this proposal up because I recognize that this work needs to be done. I just want to make sure that it is done equitably. I think a lot of times, and I've heard on multiple boards, I've heard individuals say, I cannot believe that happened again. I've heard on multiple boards, well, this is, local, or these are Black people, or these are brown people. I want people in the community to do the work. I want people of, I like the fact that we are smart enough as a board to know that people of color doing this work is what makes individuals get vaccine. But we can't say for local state, because everybody's not, every contractor isn't a good contractor. And so I would love, even after this goes through, because I know that it has the votes to go through on both sides. And again, I would never stop the work that needs to be done to make sure that we can keep people safe and keep people healthy, especially people who look like me and who might be afraid. But what I will say, once we start this work, I would like to see a budget. I mean, this is a proposal for $1.3 million. And whether at first there wasn't going to be no RFP. So I haven't even seen a budget, and I've done the math on how many workers and how much, and there were no measurable deliverables. A second ago, we were talking about let's set goals for ARPA. How we can set goals for one thing and we're not setting goals for something else, I just have questions about. Again, I'm not going to be an oppositionist to this, but if we're holding everybody else up to the same amount of scrutiny, I just want to make sure if we are saying we're doing equity work, we need to give those consumers, those residents, our best. And if we're just saying, and I'm not saying here, but you all know in popular culture, just in community work, so many times politicians throw money at Black issues, and they throw money at them without thought. And then they wonder why the issues don't get better. I am simply saying we need to put thought behind this. There's a reason why there's a reason why Rod's been in Bloomberg twice. Y'all talking about a NACO award. He didn't say it Monday, but I heard Bloomberg was at Hillside. I'm still Googling the article. So Bloomberg came down here again just to interview this man because we are post-pandemic and he is somehow still able to get Black people. He showed up at a barbershop. Those things are very intentional. I know they work, and that's why I don't mind putting money into this firm. But I don't want us to because I've heard a narrative, well, Nama, we're putting money into equity. We're putting money into Black. I want thought put into it. Throwing money at us has never worked. I want money and thought. And I know that that's going to happen. And I will stop right there because I know how people feel about this proposal. Some of you all know how I feel about it. I don't want to look at the end of this and we spent $1.3 million and the needle didn't move because we were not intentional.
So will there be a report around outcomes? Because right now all we've got is a proposal. We don't, and an ask as round numbers, but we don't have any details at all.
Commissioner Burns and Chair Howerton, I just wanted to respond in that those are very important questions. However, I just wanted to also mention there's a professor and researcher, Dr. Thomas Leveist, and he talks about, the very thing that you all are saying, that if we are not intentional around addressing health inequities or disparities, that anything that we do will fail. And that's really important. So I agree with everything you say. And certainly Director Jenkins and I share in that public health space, in that health equity space. And we will certainly participate and have those conversations to embed those equity principles into this work to the best of our ability and our expertise, and have those measurable outcomes. We can certainly provide and submit those to support this this proposal.
Thank you. Other questions or Commissioner Carter?
Thank you. Thanks, Rod and Joanne, for helping keep us sort of in the helping guide us, in how we think about this, and reminding us of the importance of being intentional, along with Naimashina. Great job there. It does look like point number 5 provides some assurance anyway that the intention is to have that group that you mentioned, Rod, a coalition, I guess, to work with whoever we contract with to administer the effort, to define priorities and metrics, ensure operational cooperation, support accountability. So that's good. I mean, it's in there, and we just need to make sure it happens. So I'm glad that Rod will be part of that coalition. I must, representing Durham County. I'm just wondering what the data is today, or the latest data. Do we know as far as uptake in the Black community, Latinx community, and white community? I know we continue to make strides there, thanks to so many innovative efforts on the part of our own people at the health department, and our community health workers that are already out there just working really hard. Just wondering where we are today.
We're at a very good place, Commissioner Burns, and thank you for your warm comments and for the question. As I surmise, it would be the children that would bring the adults, particularly in the African American community, and we continue to see it here. We saw it on full display on Saturday at 4 different vaccination events. And it's a beautiful thing. The diversity, particularly in the African American community, was seen, and we expect that to fully continue. Our Latinx population, again, I tip my hat to Latin 19, La Familia, and El Centro Hispano, because they are coming to get their vaccines in large numbers. And whatever hesitation was there, be it political, be it fear, it's gone. So we're doing extremely well, and the uptake is steadily increasing in those populations.
Thank you.
Okay, other commissioners, Commissioner Jacobs?
Thank you, Rod. It sounds like maybe we need to add some music and food to these events and just make them into parties, But,
well, there was a lot of
There was a
music
food
and
truck.
at the wheels on North Hoover Road. I'll say that.
yeah. Well, first of all, I haven't seen the announcement about the NACO award, but congratulations, and well-deserved. And I remember, when we were all finding our way through last March and April, and you were getting this data dashboard going. And one of the first things was, we were one of the first places to actually break down demographically and disaggregate for race and gender and age. And I remember Secretary Cohn literally sitting down with your staff and wanting to see and learn from what we were doing in Durham County, because to model what the state would eventually do. So that's awesome.
Thank you for taking me back down memory lane. I tend to forget things with this COVID cloud.
Yes,
but
totally.
I do remember that she put 10 toes on.
She came and visited.
She came and
That's right.
visited here, and she was very impressed with the information we provided. And the only other thing I'll add about that is, whereas other counties went to just providing a link to the state's website, we stayed the course to this day. And I think that's definitely made our residents a lot more confident in our response, and it's certainly helped us with our outcomes. But we appreciate
and the other memory I have is sitting in on the restaurant roundtable one day and hearing a restaurant owner talk about how, he checks that data dashboard every single day. And so there are a lot of people through the pandemic who have really relied on that to literally make decisions about their businesses and things like that. So it's really been a very important tool and source of information for a lot of people. So related to this proposal, I just want to clarify that, you know, that you are in support of us moving forward with this. I just want to get clarity on that from you, because, you know, obviously we want to do follow your recommendation, and then I just have some follow-up questions in line with other issues that our board members have raised. But I definitely want to do whatever supports you and your staff and your efforts. So
I have talked about it, Madam Vice Chair, with my COVID vaccine operations team, and they did have some questions, just like you guys have questions as well. But by and large, we support it. We do know that you know, it will allow us to extend our bandwidth. You know, we feel as if, you know, we're confident that with some additional training and guidance. So glad that JB Buxton and Durham Tech will be involved. Kurt Ribisil from UNC Gillings School of Health, Global Public Health will be involved. As long as the guidance is there, you know, I have an excellent relationship with Andrew Herrera from Caramedicas. You know, we feel as if this is not being done haphazardly and it can only help. So absolutely, we support it.
okay, great. And then just related to some of the, I think, excellent points that were raised by my colleagues. So it sounds like there's going to be an RFP for whoever administers the fund, whoever is the fiscal agent. So that is good to know that you don't, it's not added work for you or your staff in that sense. And so I think maybe we could get, and then just in terms of how the community health workers will be identified, to Commissioner Burns' point, what is your understanding about how that will happen? And you know, and then related to the budget.
As I read it, you know, again, while they've not named an administrator, they're kind of relying on what's already been established. You know, as Commissioner Burns has said, you know, there's been many CBOs that have been doing this work, and we certainly hope that they will tap into those resources. But I was pleased to see and pleased to say that the majority of the people who were identified in the proposal we've worked with. We've worked with TRI, we've worked with El Centro Hispano, we've worked with War for Life, you know, and we're currently and actively working with them. So if it's an opportunity for them to add to their workforce to extend our bandwidth and to get this thing done, then I'm certainly in favor of that. So again, my team and I, we reviewed it, and we just came out really feeling as if this is a good thing.
Okay. And I guess in terms of follow-up, again, with some of the concerns, maybe we can get Joanne and Rod, like at some point, the budget, I mean, would be good to see what is the budget. And then what, and to, again, Commissioner Burns' point, and Commissioner Carter, that whatever is decided upon by the coalition in terms of the measurable goals and outcomes, that kind of follow-up information would be great. Thank you so much.
Any other comments or questions? I think we've gone over the concerns about reporting more than once, and you have, Rod and Joanne have let us know that that's going to be forthcoming, and we appreciate that. Any other questions or concerns? If not, let's move on to the next item. County Manager Hager. Was there something? I thought I heard a voice.
That was me.
Commissioner Alam?
Yeah, I know I was quiet during that conversation. I just wanted to listen in to everyone's thoughts and comments. And I think, you know, I echo some of the sentiments of Commissioner Burns that she raised around process. And I'm glad that, you know, Mayor Schul provided a revised plan that I hope, you know, with Director Jenkins' support, it'll be helpful for him and his team to move forward. So I just wanted to echo those sentiments.
Okay, all right. Manager Hager, you want to continue?
All right, yes, ma'am. And I do want to share with the board that yesterday was a good day, and we're going to forward these announcements to you. We received 2 additional NACO awards. Yes, and it's so exciting. It was for ISNT and the Board of Elections, for the board, the voter response app, so that they could see where lines were short in voter locations and those kinds of issues, as well as the tax administration area also received a NACO award for their COVID response during this period. They did some innovative approaches in how they worked with their customers, and for all of our departments, doing these activities in the midst of sort of 2 major crises and getting national awards is incredible. So just wanted to share that, but we will also formally, of course, have this at a board meeting, but it is hot off the press and excited for everyone. So we'll next move to a conversation with the Department of Social Services, and they will share with us about the phase 3 of the Medicaid dollars to address compliance issues, as well as share about the tax program, the program to support taxpayers that are at or below 30% AMI for relief with their mortgage payments for the tax bill.
Good afternoon. Can everybody hear me okay?
Good afternoon, Ben, we hear you.
Great. Greetings, everyone. I hope everyone's having a great day, and thank you for a few minutes on the agenda today to talk a little bit about some of the activity that we have in the new budget. So we can go to the next slide. So this year in DSS, we obviously took a very conservative approach to the budget, considering the fiscal concerns that we were dealing with during the year. As we proposed, worked on our budget, we were instructed to include phase 3, which was actually from last year, for at least 3 of you have those recollections, regarding our Medicaid Corrective Action Plan. We were placed in Medicaid Corrective Action right before the pandemic really hit. It was January of 2020. And we, right there during the budget time for that year, we brought forward a considerable number of new positions to help us get to a better place in Medicaid. It was about 57 positions total. We agreed to, as part of the process, to phase them in over 3 phases. Phase 1 and phase 2 has been occurring over the last fiscal year. And of course, phase 3 was put till July 1st. But obviously with the landscape having changed with COVID, county budget did request that we resubmit phase 3. And we did. We have continued to operate very much in a hybrid model as well too. So we have built up a lot more remote work. As you know, we have the parking lot construction going on. So we anticipate continuing in kind of this hybrid model for the next year and a half. While again, we are open, we are still having as minimal staff that we need in the agency to try to provide services. We're doing a lot of our services by phone still. Next slide, please. And thank you for whoever is controlling the slides, because I would be a technical snafu with me, I guarantee you. We definitely, one thing that you're going to see as we make our presentation about phase 3 is that we have shifted and reshifted and reprioritized our needs in phase 3. One of the big takeaways, and it was good that we were hearing this earlier, you heard a lot about compliance earlier. And compliance is a big aspect of what we do in DSS, especially in the economic services area. And that's Medicaid, that's food and nutrition. That will include the energy programs. It includes the new emergency rental assistance program. It includes all these programs where we are determining eligibility and providing a benefit. Compliance is very, very big. We definitely wanted to reshift our focus a little bit to quality assurance and training in our phase 3 approach, which was a different approach. We had some of those positions in there. However, we still had some line Medicaid workers and lead workers that we were wanting to add to the program. But we decided with the need to really improve in quality assurance that we wanted to refocus that ask. And that's what you're going to really see when we get to the nuts and bolts. We even created a white paper for quality assurance and training to really show, and it was part of our budget packet that was submitted to budget. It really showed this importance of quality assurance and training. One of the most critical aspects that we face in these programs is we are constantly reviewed and monitored by both the federal and the state. And then of course we have the county single audit. And we were joking last year, at one point, we actually, in about a 3-month period of time, had about 23 reviews or monitorings that had occurred just in a 3-month period of time. And we were joking how, we feel like we're always at the doctor's office getting the exam with these audits and reviews. And one of the risks that we have with these audits and reviews is that we can have substantial paybacks. So it gets down to the point, and the best example, one of the best examples I can give is one that we have lived. We have an audit called, we have a funding source called Title 4E, and that gets audited and reviewed by the feds on a regular basis. And 4E is a funding source for children in foster care. So basically, you could have a situation where when you're doing a 4E review, you could go back to 2014, let's say. They could pull a case that started in 2014. And if you did not determine eligibility correctly, or if you had a missing document or a missing form or missing court order, you could actually be responsible for paying back every bit of those $40 that you have used from 2014 to the present. And that can be literally thousands of dollars. It could be $100,000. So these are very important compliance issues that we have, and they have high risk to them. And of course, it goes to service as well too. We want to make sure that we're providing benefits timely. We want to make sure we're providing them correctly. Those are the things obviously that are looked at first and foremost. That was part of the Medicaid Corrective Action Plan, is that we were not providing them timely. And on top of that, it's about getting services out to the citizen and not approving benefits that are not that a citizen is not eligible for. So it's very important that we have a lot of accuracy in this area. So we focus on internal controls. We focus on compliance. We're wanting to look to really improve our overall audit outcomes with all these audits. And therefore, that's how we've restructured phase 3. We did do strategic plans in all our areas this year, but again, the focus was really in the quality assurance side of the house and how we can improve in that quality. Next slide, please. So this is starting to get to the heat of the meat of the matter for us. So this was the original request that we submitted back in March. And as you can see, we really did initially restructured our request quite a bit, and we have even restructured it since then. So, and I'll cover that in a second. But this shows you some of the needs that we have, and really, we were focused on a couple of areas that are different here that I wanted to talk about. First is the audit compliance manager. This is a position that through the internal audit committees that we have with Darlana, we go through internal audits every year, and we present to the audit oversight committee, which many of you are a part of. This was a recommendation that came out of that process because of the number of audits and reviews and monitorings that we do have, that we need probably a dedicated person just to help with these issues, to support those processes, to look to improve our internal controls, to help coordinate these processes. So that was something that we added to phase 3. We added an adult aging and adult program services manager. This is probably the one position that is really not related to compliance to some degree, although it really is in some ways, because what we have seen is in adult and aging services over the last 4 years, we have expanded the scope of services we're providing, especially in the economic services area. We have added the HOPWA program. We've added coordinated entry and intake. We've added additional emergency assistance. We've added emergency rental assistance, which, as you know, is the current program that we have. And as you've seen, a program of that size and that scope, it's very difficult to get it off the ground. We've had struggles all the way, but we're getting there and we're getting those benefits out. But we needed to really look at adding a management layer there to help coordinate all these expansive programs that are coming in aging and adult services. The rest of them focus pretty much in the income maintenance and QAT area. Next slide, please. So we were told in the recommended budget that we had 10 positions were being recommended, and we were told to basically prioritize what we felt we needed the most and to submit that as our recommendation. So this is what this slide represents. And as you can see, it is really now focused primarily on the compliance side of the house. So we did include the audit compliance manager. We felt that was a priority one. We included a customer accountability and talent development program manager, and this is in the compliance area. This is in the QAT area. We have a lot of HIPAA issues. We have a lot of HIPAA compliance issues that Lynn Thomas deals with on a regular basis. We've added additional workers in this area, so we needed to add some additional management oversight to keep people from being too extended. So that was the purpose of adding that. It will give another layer of management oversight. The heart of our request for these 10 positions are those last two lines. So the first one is dealing with quality assurance and training in the social work areas. This is dealing in the child welfare and adult and aging areas. Adult and aging only has one quality assurance person that reviews the programs. Now they have well over 30 programs within that division, but they have one person doing all that work. So we're adding an additional 2 positions to that so that we can try to ensure that we have compliance and we're meeting the standards of those programs. We're adding 3 in child welfare because child welfare is the highest risk area that we have. That is the area that, again, we're dealing with the life and safety of children, and we're dealing with those potential huge paybacks with Title IV-E. That, coupled with the transformation that we're going to be seeing with Families First Prevention Act, which we've talked a little bit about with you, and the child welfare transformation that's happening at the state level, it's going to be very critical that we continue to increase our efforts in quality assurance and training in child welfare. Within our strategic plan, we have a goal to actually have a QAT person for every unit in child welfare. Now, we're a long ways from that because that would literally probably be about 25 positions. And we don't dare come to you and ask you for 25 positions this year. But this is kind of a start of that process, is to increase that compliance monitoring and that training and those case reviews in that area. The last part is getting back to the Medicaid corrective action and food and nutrition and the economic services side of the house. We're actually going to add 3 more there because we have added positions with phase 1 and 2. Therefore, we need to increase the capacity there. Our budget director, Mr. Lane, definitely preaches about reallocation of positions, and we feel that is very important. So we are actually going to look to reallocate 1 position that we have, a vacancy that we feel we can reallocate to help with some of the supervision of the quality assurance. So we're going to get to one of those needs through a reallocation. But then within the rest of those positions that we had, this is where we basically set the priorities at. And again, it's very much focused on compliance. Next slide. So these 2 positions are in here because in talking with Interim County Manager Hager, we have decided these are 2 high need positions, but we have the potential to fund them with ARPA funds. The adult and or aging and adult services manager is the one I talked about earlier. That is definitely, in my opinion, a critical need. And for some reason, if we are unable to fund that position with ARPA funds, I may look to trade that position out for one of those 10. But our hope is that we can perhaps use ARPA funds, because this position will be supporting a lot of the programs that we are taking on that kind of fit in that category, especially the emergency rental assistance programs. But again, we have basically Lee Little and Janine Gordon, and that is it. And that is a wide span of services. So they need a little bit more management oversight. The accounting tech 3 is a position that is, I think Claudia was actually referring earlier. I noticed it was like talking about the human services and administrative functions. This is to help with that business side of these programs that have become very massive. The emergency rental assistance program is probably going to be well over $20 million when all is said and done. So we definitely need some help in the financial area, so we can hopefully maybe fund that position as well too with ARPA funds. The agent and adult program manager though is definitely the most critical of those two. Okay, next slide. So some strategic goals that we've set forth from the corrective action plan with Medicaid is to improve customer service within the economic assistance areas. And that's all areas. That's not just Medicaid. It's food and nutrition. It's work first. It's energy. It's emergency rental. We definitely want to continue to try to improve in customer service in this area. We've tried new things with the emergency rental assistance program. One of the feedbacks that we got from talking to community groups and to talking to citizens at large was they don't feel comfortable coming into DSS always and applying. So we really tried to do it differently by setting up the automation and allowing applications online and using community partners as access entry points so that they didn't even have to visit DSS to apply for this service. Now, of course, that has come with the technology challenges that has presented us, which we, again, are still dealing with. However, that could potentially be a model going forward as well, too. And using community partners, I think, is going to be a big asset to us in the future. Another strategic goal we have is to improve our working relationship and service with the Latinx community. We've had a forum with some Latinx consumers. They have identified some challenges they have with social services. So we are trying to look at education and outreach, more partnerships, and getting better outcomes for the Latinx population. That's going to be coupled with hopefully creating some consumer advisory groups as well within the Medicaid and food and nutrition area. And then, of course, the big one is improving compliance with our program monitoring and audits. We want to get to a better place, and that is really what we focused on with phase 3. Next slide, please. This is a happy slide. So yay, we did do it. We are out of Medicaid corrective action. We came out of Medicaid corrective action in January of 2021. And we did this through a pandemic, which was to me even more amazing. And we have actually passed the Medicaid report card every month since April of 2020. So we felt like we have really gotten to a better place in a lot of ways. And phase 1 and phase 2 has been a big part of that. We have more capacity now, we have more hands-on, and we are really in a much better place. Rhonda still has a lot of needs in her area, and we still have some strategic goals we want to meet. But we did back out some of her positions in phase 3 because we feel like maybe we can get there through some reallocation as well too, and reclassification. That's always a strategy for us, and that we can build some other strategies more long-term. But I want to first off just commend her staff, Rhonda and Catherine, and her program managers, the supervisors, the workers. They did it, and they did it through a pandemic. And that was just nothing short of amazing. Now, we say that, and we're like, yay, we're out of Medicaid corrective action. That is wonderful. However, please know that we are still under a RETA audit and we are under a CAPERS audit, both in Medicaid and food and nutrition. So we went out from one and went right into 2 more. So we are always under those pressures, and that's why we really wanted to focus on compliance. It is a big a big source for where we need to improve in DSS. Next slide. So last is the homes program that is been proposed, and we are happy to be a part of this and considering the pilot that you want to operate potentially in DSS. Our Board of Social Services did support this program back at their regular session in May. Commissioner Jacobs is a part of our DSS board and actually is our chair. The program does allocate 3 positions to our department, which we do very much appreciate. It would be a social worker, that we would have 2 social worker 2 positions that would come from that, and then a social work supervisor. I do want to make a note and officially go on the record, and this is for Tony Noel and Human Resources, that the social work supervisor is actually a social work supervisor 2. I think in our report, it has social work supervisor 1. So we mislabeled the classification, but it would be a 2. And what we would do is basically integrate this program into our other programs. So we would have more than 2 workers doing this program. It would be done across, it would be cross-cutting across some units. And we might have specialized training and certain people identified, but it would be more than 2. But these 2 positions would, in addition, support the other economic assistance programs that we have. So we're very excited about that and very, very happy to be bringing that on. The aging, I did put into consideration again of going back to the ARPA funds and the critical nature of us really getting the adult and aging program manager. I just cannot stress and emphasize that enough. Lee and Janine, we're going to burn them out if we continue at this pace because we add programs but haven't given them the support. And of course, the Accounting Tech 3 is very important as well. So we hopefully can get that with some ARPA funds to start. I understand it may shift to county funding once the ARPA funds have expired, but perhaps we can bridge that gap with ARPA funds. Next slide. So the other aspect that we would want to consider for this is obviously potentially building some software. This program, it's kind of maybe modeling off the emergency rental assistance program for ease of applications and perhaps partnering with some community partners again to help people apply, like reinvestment partners. We have a good partnership with them that we could use them perhaps to help people apply. So we would maybe want to build out some software to help with that. We've seen the challenges of that with ERAP. You know, I cannot stress that enough. It is not easy to roll out new software. We could potentially build on the system that we have. We may want to look at other avenues. I don't know, because we have had some struggles with the ERAP software. But we definitely need to consider that, I think, in terms of helping people to apply and making it easy to apply. We want to make these programs accessible and easy to get to without people feeling like they have to come to DSS. But we're very excited to do this, and we definitely would want to look to collect data for you and evaluate and give you data so that you can make data-driven decisions regarding the future of the program as well. We definitely want to call it a pilot so that we can do that and help give you information to make those decisions. This is definitely something that is going to be very important again in the compliance side of things. So we definitely will want to measure the quality assurance aspects of these and really keep an eye on how this program works, how our emergency rental assistance program works, and these other programs. It's going to be very important that we have oversight of these. Emergency rental assistance, again, is millions of dollars, and we need to make sure we're getting those dollars out correctly. The tax program will be a local program. It's going to be more subject to local compliance and making sure we're meeting those standards. But all that is something that's very important in what we want to do. So I think next slide, I believe, is for questions. So that kind of gives you a summary of what we're looking at with our budget. Again, we're really focused on the quality assurance and training and compliance side of the house and helping you get this homes, I'm calling it homes, but the tax subsidy program, I think that's the Mecklenburg County's name, helping you get that program going, and we're happy to entertain any questions. I do have some members of my team here, Janine and Rhonda and Kelly and Crystal and Catherine are all here and present, so we're happy to answer any questions you might have, and thank you.
So Ben, did you want to stop now, or do you want to go ahead and do the tax presentation?
Well, that was my part of the text presentation. I know you
Yes.
have you have a report that we did to the DSS board, I believe. That was, you know, my goal there is one thing I'm definitely not an expert on is taxes, other than paying them. So,
Okay.
but
All right.
I would bow to Dwayne a little bit there, because the way I see our role is, we're going to run it for you, but we will run it how you would like it run. And the guidelines would be set by you as the policymakers, and we would follow those guidelines. So I didn't really have a formal presentation on that outside of the bullet. And I see Dwayne.
Okay. Well, of course, we always thank you, Ben, for your presentation, and mostly thank you for the commitment and the work that you do. And one of the toughest departments that we know that DSS is one of those that pulls on all of our heartstrings. And you and your team just drill down and do the work. And we know it's tough work.
Thank you.
So yes, thank you for your presentation. Yeah, thank you so much. Commissioners, questions, comments? Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ben, for your great overview of what's happening in DSS. One thing I do want to clarify is that the DSS board did recommend approval of this program. Just want to clarify, this program is to be operated out of DSS. So it will be a DSS program. And the recommendation was approval with what was outlined in the proposal. But also there was one recommendation that the DSS board did make, which was that that the city be requested to share in the cost of the administration of the program, that because it's going to be a joint city-county program. So that was one suggestion that was made by the DSS board. And I don't know, Ben, if you were going to pass on anything formally, if we needed to do that.
Yeah.
But
Claudia has some information there.
Yes, I have the updated proposal, and that has been uploaded to the system. So that information is there, and we've also shared, we'll share the updated version with the city as well. And so there's a commitment there to share that cost.
And I thought that was the original conversation, was that this would be a city and county proposal from the beginning. And I have one other question before and you can answer both. We received something this morning about if you apply for one, you can't apply for the others. Can you, the other tax programs?
Right.
Can you respond to that as well, Claudia?
Sure, and I'll also have Dwayne step in. That's sort of the standard approach that we've used for some of our other programs as well. So if you are eligible for some of the other exemption programs, you would not be able to do both. That's basically it. And Dwayne can weigh in as well. And that's also similar to the model with the Mecklenburg County.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw Commissioner Burns. Was Commissioner Burns' hand? And then we'll come to you, Dwayne.
It's really quick. One, I just want to, this is an opportunity for all of us to just sit in the fact that there were two divergent ideas about how to do something. And we came together and it got done. So if nothing else, I remember 2 years ago when we talked about this project and a lot of us were running and we said, it is not going to work. People are not going to apply, and we put it out there, and it was put out there because there were people on this county commission that recognized there was an issue and they cared about it. Right. Even though, and I was a naysayer, and I can admit that. And then when I got here and was still a naysayer, there were people on this board and in the county who said, you know what? Okay, well, how can we make it better? And Commissioner Lum and I bothered Poe Dwayne. We bothered people in Charlotte. We irritated the people at the coalition, but we said, okay, well, so the fix is to take it out of his office because it's illegal and put it in the Ben's office. Okay, well, let's do that. And so here it is, done. And I just want people to look at that. Durham, Charlotte has they're about 4 times our size, right? And they only put $250,000 in. So we're putting in $950,000. I know two of them are for people, but we're putting in 3 times the amount of money, and we are a quarter of the size. And we get to sit here and set guidelines. So I just want to take this opportunity to say to the public and to say to people here, ladies, it can be done. If we just try. Now, Commissioner Lum, I'm not going to say on camera, but you remember the promise you made me if we got this project off the ground, and I'm holding you to it. So y'all just wait, because we knew that it's not anything bad. Lord have mercy. We'll just see what we're going to name it. That's all I'm saying. We had a deal that we could about what we're going to name it. So I'm happy about that. And I'm asking y'all over the next 4,
I believe you requested the Burns alum tax welfare program, right?
Oh, okay. Is that what we said? I don't remember. Listen, do you know they would have us on the front of the paper? Say, yes, just the misappropriations of funds and names. But no, that's a cool name, though. I will say the one thing I am happy about that Ben pointed out, I'm happy he explained it when he said build software. I think for him and Janine, they picked up some best practices with the CARES Act funding that they had to give out. I know that labor pain, and believe me, Hope has had some upgrade with the dedicated phone line. You're like, yeah, I need that now. Software program that puts all the partners together. So for anybody who's looking at that random cost, if I can just say, y'all give Ben that money for the software updates. I'm here to say it's worth its weight in gold. And across state government and counties, everybody's looking at, okay, how could I have made this program get better? What transferable things can I move over? So Ben, I'm just happy to say I love that the team learned from that one and that they're using it in other programs, so that, in a year we don't have those same labor pains. And I'm gonna stop there. So thank you.
Thank you.
I want to go ahead, Ben.
I was just saying, I agree with her totally. Those pains are hard. We're still feeling them in some ways. They're still, I guess, that's as close as I'll get to labor pains, maybe right there. But it's
well, I just want to say that one of the things that was an obstacle for us is we were trying to put it through the tax department. What we knew and what we were advised was that it couldn't go through the tax department. So after we talked to Charlotte, to Mecklenburg County, we found out it was a different way, because Mecklenburg County, when I talked to the chair of the board there, he said that they did not put it through the tax department. And that's what we were trying to do. So we were kind of blocked there. But once we found out that they put it through DSS, it opened up a new avenue for us. And I'm going to toss it over to Dwayne and let him talk a little bit more about it.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Vice Chair, Commissioners. It's good to see you all. Dwayne Brinson, Tax Administrator, for those that may be watching in the public. I just want to take this opportunity to cover some of the program qualifications. In case people are watching this, it may expose them to the program, and they may be wondering how they qualify. And I want to share some of those qualifications real quickly. Before I go on to that, regarding the earlier question about taking advantage of 2 programs potentially, when you look at this pool of tax relief programs at the state level, the circuit breaker, the homestead, disabled veteran, you can choose only one of those at the state level. And we kind of follow that model with this. I don't know that there's a local prohibition saying that it has to be only one, but it certainly is a standard and it is a requirement of state programs. So that's why we modeled this program in that way. Now, as far as the program, it's nameless right now. We're working on that. But the program itself, I'm very excited for the community to announce this. It's really exciting. It's one of the things I've been working on since I arrived in Durham. So I'm really excited for the community. First requirement has to be in Durham County. There's got to be a Durham County property. That should be a given. The income level, the household income has to be 30% of the area median income or lower. The residents can't be receiving any other state subsidy tax assistance, meaning homestead, meaning circuit breaker, disabled veteran, those programs we just mentioned. This is trying to capture a population that doesn't benefit from a state program. That's been one of the goals all along is, we've got people that don't qualify for homestead, don't qualify for the circuit breaker. This program tries to capture that population. The homeowners have to have owned and lived in the home for the previous 10 years. So it's our longtime homeowners in Durham that would qualify for this. And then the assistance is capped at $750 for the total tax bill. So it can either be, the benefit can either be half of the tax bill or up to a maximum of $750. That's the cap for the total tax bill. The looks like that's all the requirements that we do have. As we've mentioned, this is a joint project with the city. We've had multiple meetings with the city. So as far as funding for it, in the white paper here, we've got a portion allocated for county funding, a portion allocated for city funding. Other than that, that's the basics of the program. And we all feel like this will work. We feel like this is a legal alternative to what the board has requested. And we're excited to get it off the ground running and work with DSS and getting this done.
Okay, questions, comments, Commissioner Long?
Thank you, Chair Howerton. Thank you so much, Dwayne. And yeah, I just want to echo the sentiments first of Commissioner Burns that she raised that, this is something that the community's been asking for, and not just asking for, the community's been needing. Our long-term homeowners are being pushed out by rising housing prices. So this is a great way for us to be able to support long-term Durham residents to be able to stay in their homes. And I'm really excited to come up with a name with Commissioner Burns and the rest of the board and staff. I did have a couple of questions. I had sent them over after our budget retreat, and I know Keith, thank you for all of the answers you had sent. And I think for this line item, it was mentioned we would discuss it further today. Just one of the questions that I had was, obviously when I had brought it up at the budget retreat, my goal and, dream is that we could have it at 80% AMI. Obviously that is a much more robust program. I think 30%, while it's a great starting point, I think even people who are at 60, 70, 80% AMI are still struggling to make ends meet. And it may sound like, the higher percentage that it means that they're making a lot more money. That's not necessarily the case when you factor in all the other expenses. So I wanted to know, what would it take for us, like on a phased approach, to get to 80%, if it's not able to happen this year? How could we get to that with a forward-looking plan, as well as at this current amount that we're allocating to the program at the 30% AMI and the maximum allocation or that people can grant that people can apply for? How many families are we looking at being able to help with this program currently?
The current projections include a number of about 3,200 families. To answer part of your other question, part of the reason I know DSS recommended a phased approach and a pilot was for us to get a better sense of participants. I know the board had a commitment to focus on the 30% AMI. And there was also interest, of course, looking at a larger scale. Mecklenburg County had a lower dollar amount of $350. And so that was another factor as well. They went up to the 80%, but their dollar amount was lower. Theirs was at 350, and it was only 25% of the bill. And we did 750 and 50% of the bill. So there was an attempt to try to help the taxpayers more, but it also was in line with some of the funding approaches that were done with other programs. We will know better once we see patterns, how long it will take. Incrementally, we could foresee it happening over a couple of years, depending upon the level of participation and cost. I think that is always the question as far as is from a budget development. How do we allocate dollars to programs that are new with competing priorities? And so one of the ways that we're suggesting that we address the current budget is, although there is 750, for instance, on the county side for grant funding, dollars above that amount, we would look at using ARPA dollars to backfill. With the ARPA funding available for the next few years, that is a potential way for us to go into the other categories a little faster. But within a couple of months, we'll be able, well, probably by December, November, we can at least share, I'm sure, the levels of applications and actual participants. That may take a little bit longer because that's the other issue. When you look at the size of Mecklenburg County, they only had maybe 160 applicants that had applied. And they did go up to the 80%. So it is somewhat strategy to engage how many will apply so that we aren't over budgeting prematurely and can incrementally add dollars, and DSS can determine should we, based on their analytics, go to a higher level.
So I have a follow-up to that, if that's okay, Madam Chair.
I'm sorry?
I had a follow-up question, if it's okay.
Sure, go ahead.
So would it be possible and appropriate, like if we had the funding amount for the start stay the same, but increase the AMI? So like if we run into, I know you're saying we're doing a measured approach, but like having that 700,000 earmarked, but allowing people who are at 60% AMI to be able to apply, up to 60% AMI be able to apply.
That would be something that we would have to circle back to the DSS board from a process procedural standpoint. And I am sure that's something that can be considered, but it's the way that this has to be implemented sort of has to follow a certain protocol. And I think the intent was to first gauge how, from a pilot perspective, what the levels were, and then see how it needed to be tweaked.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? Commissioner Jacobs?
Thank you. And I also just want to circle back to some things. Number one, Claudia, it's great to hear you say, and I know this was spoken about before, but the option to increase the funding for the pilot if we do have a lot of applicants and we get to the point where we've used up the 750,000. So I really appreciate that strategy. And to also get back to Ben's request of the 2 additional positions, the Aging Adult Services manager and the Account Tech 3 manager. I just say that I personally support that as also another use of ARPA funds. During this pandemic, I really, besides some of the obvious departments like public health, nobody other than our DSS has been on the front lines in terms of when people are in crisis. Since last March, they have come to DSS, whether it's food and nutrition services or help with utilities or help with rental assistance. This has been when people are really in crisis, they go to DSS. And I just want to personally recognize all of our staff and just what that takes to be on the receiving end of that phone call or whatever when people are in need, but also the way, especially our aging and adult services staff, Lee and Janine and folks, Kelly in finance, just kind of building the plane as you fly it, which we've all been doing with COVID, but with wanting to be there for this funding when it becomes available. As Commissioner Burns knows, it can happen overnight. We literally had a situation where we found out about additional state funding. And I heard the story at our DSS meeting last week, how Ben and Janine had to personally apply for the funding using their own personal identification. And Ben didn't have a passport. This was over the weekend, and Janine had to give her passport number. So the account that was created.
Turned down.
I mean, this is the kind of crazy stuff that is literally happening so that we don't miss these deadlines for funding coming into our community. But all that being said, this is why we desperately need, number one, another person to support all of these needs that are going to, we know, June 30th is when the moratorium gets lifted on evictions. And we know the food situation is still going to be happening. So I think this is a very good use of ARPA funding for both of these positions. So thank you for putting that out there. And I hope our board will support that. And the second thing that Commissioner Burns alluded to, which is that we've learned so much from this pandemic, and like with the ERAP money, creating a new software. And also the second part is partnering with community organizations. We've never done this before. And so this is a great model that we have now for the tax grant program, because the ERAP money is being points of contact and distribution now are with, Ben, remind me, Legal Aid, Healing with Care, El Centro. What are some of the other organizations that are also points of contact?
Gosh, help me, Janine. You got them on the top of your head. I can't even remember. There she is.
Community Empowerment Fund, the World Organization, what is it?
Church World Service.
Church World Organization.
Yeah.
So we kind of have a wide range, whether it's the faith community, whether it's the Latinx community, as well as partners who are working directly with the under or never served populations.
Right. So my point is just that this is a great model we have, which frankly, we've never done before. And it's a great model for the tax grant program. So anyway, thank you all.
So I want to refer back to Commissioner Long's conversation a bit ago. One of the things that, we don't want to leave the public with thinking that we're only putting $750,000 in this program. The administrative cost is included in here. We're talking about over $1 million And also in the document, it says that the city and the county will reevaluate to see what's necessary. So it's not like what's happening right now is going to be forever. It's someplace to start. You just want the community to know that it's not the end all be all. We just don't have any data that tell us what is going to happen. So we're starting someplace. Okay, any other, Commissioner Carter?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thanks to all my colleagues who've been so supportive of this, and thanks to DSS and the board and the tax office, and all the people who've been sort of trying to think this through, figuring out how to make it happen, our legal team. I see this as perhaps one of our most important strategies for neighborhood stabilization, really trying to help stabilize our neighborhoods so that when we have 20 to 30 people moving to Durham a day, we don't have 20 to 30 long-time low-income homeowners leaving Durham every day because they can't afford to stay in their homes. And so I really do hope, and what I hear everybody saying is that we want to eventually, we want to really pilot this year, really understand the patterns, do a lot of outreach to try to make sure people apply who are eligible. And then, think about how to scale it up to 60 or 80% AMI, and how to lift the cap on the amount of funding. All those things that we know would help more people in a more significant way. But this is just a fantastic start. Certainly support the use of the ARPA funding for the positions that are needed for the administration of this. And there was two things. Our own Perry Manns and some folks from the city at the HSAC meeting yesterday presented on some work that the city is doing around affordable housing. Of course, they have their bond, they have their whole community development department working on that. They get a lot of the block grant money for that. But, of course, the county's building on 300 and 500 Main Street are wrapped decks with affordable housing. And so Perry did a great job of representing the county on our work there. And I really appreciated hearing about all the things that the city, they're doing with their bond and everything. And one thing they mentioned that we might be able to tap into here is that they are using some of the money for property tax outreach, to just do put more of an additional effort into reaching out to people to let you know, hey, you could apply for this. Here's how you do it. We'll help you. Maybe, and Ben mentioned Reinvestment Partners and all the great work they do with that. Maybe there's a way of piggybacking on the city and their outreach effort there. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention was this idea of also including habitat homeowners that are certified as being 30% AMI, if there are any. I'm assuming there might be, but maybe they have to have 60% AMI, I'm not sure. But anyway, they clearly wouldn't have been in their homes 10 years yet, but still wouldn't be able to afford their taxes. And might we consider including them? Maybe the board, maybe if that's a DSS board decision, maybe they could take that under consideration. If that's something we decide, maybe we could ask our staff to analyze that and consider that for us too. Thanks, everybody.
I really, this is great. This is a great initiative that we are supporting here, commissioners. The one thing that I do want to say that, when we consistently raise taxes, gentrification impacts the people that we're trying to help. And I hope that we will give more attention to ensuring that people are economically secure, that we are focusing just as much energy on our citizens getting jobs, good paying jobs. Because we, every time we raise taxes, the people we're trying to help, it impacts them. Commissioner Lum?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to add one more thing. I know I'm usually the very, very quiet, but I'm just really, really excited about this program. And I just wanted to jump in again to make another comment about how it's so important for the community to see, as Commissioner Burns had mentioned before, that this is one of the programs that was constantly brought up during the campaign. And, you know, everyone had a lot of questions about how do we make it work? How do we make it work? And I just want to say that this is, you know, the fact that this is coming in on our first budget. When I was really excited and trying to reach out to each commissioner about this program, every single one, when I called, said, I am supportive of this. How do we make it happen? And that's exactly what the community needs. And for us, like as a board, we're a board of all women, that we found a creative way to make it happen by working together and finding, even though we had different approaches to how this program might work, we came to an overall decision with the help of staff. So I'm just really wanted to reiterate how excited I am to be able to set up this program for the community.
And Madam Chair, if I could just real quickly.
Dwayne, was that you?
Yes, ma'am. Just wanted to say, I
Okay.
know last year when we had to get creative and come up with a deferral program, the board asked me to keep tabs on what's happening at the legislature and with other counties with tax relief programs, which I promised to do and I have. But before I even had a chance to learn about the homes program, Deborah Craig Ray had it in my inbox. So hats off to Deborah Craig Ray. She's definitely on top of things. We're in good hands with her. So we're very much a team with this initiative, and I can, thanks to her, most certainly.
Well, thank you, Deborah. I know you're on there listening somewhere, and thank you, Dwayne, because, you know, as commissioners, as elected folks, we always have to acknowledge that we don't do what we do without the staff. I was on a Lillian's List conversation last night, Zoom, with some new commissioners, and we talked about staff. And I told them, acknowledge and appreciate the staff. You cannot get your work done without the staff. It's just, we hire great people for their expertise, and we have to rely on them. So again, Dwayne, Deborah, thank you. Anything else for either of you? Anything else for you, Deborah? Can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm just happy to support all of our departments and the board whenever we have important critical issues such as this one.
Thank you. Thank you.
Madam Chair, one quick thing. The city calls their program Forever Home Durham, just so we know. We don't want to steal their name or take their name. Not that we would. We might even not like something like that. But anyway, just so you know.
Okay, we'll talk about that one later. Okay. All right. If there's nothing else on that one, we'll, Claudia, we can move on to, I'm sorry, Manager Hager.
Oh, you're fine. Manager Hager throws me off too.
Move to the next item.
Yes, so the next item, we will have discussions about our pre-K efforts, and Ms. Kate Elander is here, and Drew Cummins may also share with this discussion as well. And so I'll pass it on.
Thank you so much, Manager Hager and Chair Howerton and commissioners. It's nice to be with y'all this afternoon to talk about early childhood, which is one of my favorite topics as a mom of a young kiddo. Yes, so I brought some updates for you all about the Early Childhood Action Plan, about Durham Pre-K, and about how some ARPA dollars might be able to be leveraged to strengthen our early childhood systems in Durham in alignment with ECAP and also with Durham Pre-K. So I will just walk through a few updates about the Early Childhood Action Plan, then Durham Pre-K, then potential uses for ARPA dollars, and then really I'm just here to take your questions. So thanks for having me today. And we can go to the next slide. Thanks. So the board approved a contract with the Durham Children's Initiative to develop an early childhood action plan for Durham modeled after the state's early childhood action plan. We last came to you in March with an update about that work. At that time, we had finalized these 21 recommendations to strengthen our early childhood systems through a ton of work across the community with parents, with community members, members of community-rooted organizations, nonprofit folks, and folks representing our early childhood institutions. It's really been a team effort to land on these 21 recommendations. And in March, we launched action teams, 21 separate action teams, one each working on each of these recommendations. And since March, those teams have been working and bringing their ideas about how to bring these recommendations to life. And they are now in the process of finalizing 21 action plans around these recommendations. And you can go to the next slide, please. I'm also going to put a link in the chat. I can find it. Oh, maybe there's not a chat. Okay, I'll follow up with a link, sorry. So in order to kind of be as transparent as possible about the work that each of these action teams has been doing and what they're lifting up as strategies to implement the recommendations, Durham Children's Initiative developed a temporary website to house those recommendations and the strategies that are being developed. It also has a video, one in English and one in Spanish for folks who haven't been as connected to the early childhood action planning process to be able to just learn what it's been all about and why it's important. So I can share that with you all following this meeting, but in addition to focus groups and stakeholder interviews and bringing the strategies to different community task forces that focus on different parts of our early childhood system, we also have those draft strategies available on the web for anyone to review and to provide feedback. And that website will be open for about another week. We've been kind of pushing it out there for the month of May. And then we're going to sort of download all of the feedback from all of the different places that it's been coming in from, provide it to each of the 21 action teams, and they're going to integrate that into their final draft action plans. So if you do go to the website to review the different strategies, just know that they're still under construction. They're draft strategies, but they are getting closer to final every day. I'm actually together with a family and childcare home director leading early childhood educator focus groups tonight to get their thoughts on some of these recommendations. So it is a rush to the finish, but we are getting there. And if you could go to the next slide, please. So this is just our timeline through the end of June, which is when the contract with the Durham Children's Initiative concludes for the plan. So as I mentioned, we're incorporating final feedback into the plan. The action teams are submitting their draft action plans in early June. The review teams that have been kind of providing guidance and questions and support to those action teams all along the way will review and finalize those plans in mid-June. And we will be furiously writing our early childhood action plan around each of those 21 small plans in June, and a final draft of the plan will be finished by the end of this fiscal year. Next slide, please. So we have been kind of sitting with this tension between jumping into implementation quickly of the strategies because of the number of urgent challenges that we have in our early childhood system that many of us are super familiar with, but also really wanting to set the implementation process for our plan up for success. And we've just been talking with stakeholders who've been engaged in the planning process so far about a way to spend a little bit of time this fall to set up a really strong process to guide the early childhood action plan moving forward. So on this slide, you'll just see kind of the next steps that we are proposing for what we're calling an implementation preparation phase. So we're hoping to gather a representative steering committee with a majority of the membership being parents, frontline workers, and representatives of community-rooted organizations, but also with seats for early childhood nonprofits and institutions in our community. We are planning to facilitate a review process of the draft plan for implementation considerations related to racial equity. We're interested in establishing a fund development committee. There are grant opportunities coming in all the time that are very in alignment with the recommendations that have been drafted for the Early Childhood Action Plan. And we'd like to go ahead and start doing some even more intentional work on how to leverage those. And then finally, just spending a little bit more time learning about some of the different collective impact models and establishing or identifying one that would kind of be the best fit for Durham. With the steering committee, which we envision would kick off in September after a nomination and selection process later this summer, we'd be focusing on building relationships and setting principles for power sharing, recognizing that just having a majority of parents and frontline workers and representatives of community-rooted organizations on the steering committee doesn't mean that there is sort of equal power there. Identifying the best long-term staffing structure for the plan implementation and prioritizing the strategies for investment that seem most important or most urgent, and maybe also most in alignment with different funding sources like the American Rescue Plan. And then for the strategies prioritized by the steering committee, confirming implementation partners, launching some more detailed implementation planning for those strategies with those partners, including cost estimates, and beginning implementation where it's possible of those prioritized strategies. Next slide, please. So in order to make this happen, to kind of help extend the implementation preparation phase through December, we are recommending with the group of stakeholders who've been engaged in the process so far, extended contract with the Durham Children's Initiative and also with one or more community-rooted partners to help oversee the onboarding of the steering committee and the facilitation of that work, as well as some of the other activities on the previous slide. We also recognize that we'll need support of those community-rooted partners for the anti-racism review and to provide guidance to the steering committee as we set up those principles for power sharing and fund allocation. So that is where we are with our early childhood action planning process. The final draft of the plan will be available at the end of June, and then it will be designed and finalized over those next couple months leading up to September. And we will have that plan available in English and in Spanish, and there'll be kind of an executive summary, which will be a little bit more digestible, and then we'll have the full version for all of the nerdy folks who are interested in digging deeply into what's being proposed. And then kicking off our steering committee in September. So with that, I'm just going to transition to a short update on our Durham pre-K program. And then I guess we can take questions at the end, unless you all would prefer for me to pause and take questions about the Early Childhood Action Plan now. Either way actually works for me.
Any questions? Okay, I can't see any hands if there are hands. If not, you want to continue?
Sure, absolutely. Thank you. So Child Care Services Association with their partners prepared a Durham pre-K update that was a part of the packet for the joint Board of Ed, Board of County Commissioner meeting that was either last week or 2 weeks ago, I can't remember. So a much more robust update lives there on all of the different details of implementation, both sort of in the classroom of the program and also of the system. But I just wanted to lift up a few updates for you here as well. Enrollment is underway for the 21-22 school year. They have established a new online application platform, which is sort of allowing all of the different partners who are engaged with Durham Pre-K to kind of have simultaneous access to different documents and to best understand kind of how many folks are in that portal and where they are in the application process and where those reviews are. And I think that has really helped to streamline the application process, given the complexity of the program and the number of the partners that are involved. There have been just short of 1,000 applications that have been started as of earlier this month in that platform, and child screenings are underway to inform placements in seats. The first round of family notifications for the 21-22 school year will happen in mid-June. There'll be another round in mid-July, and then it will be rolling from there. There are really strong and creative outreach efforts underway. I was just in a meeting yesterday where we're brainstorming some more of those. There is still some hesitancy about in-person learning, given that vaccines are not yet available for small children. And so we are anticipating an additional sort of rush of applications in July and August as folks are kind of really wrapping their brain around, okay, learning, the program is happening, it's happening in person, and just kind of folks taking a couple more months to try to figure out what's best for their family. So we do anticipate strong demand for the program this year. And we'll say in terms of enrollment for this year, while the program has not been fully enrolled, enrollment has been stronger in comparison to our neighboring counties in their universal pre-K programs. So hats off to all of the Durham pre-K partners for that. That's really important. I think that the Durham pre-K program has likely been an important source of engagement for a lot of our 4-year-olds this year. Contracts for providers for the 21-22 school year will be completed in June. And Durham pre-K providers, the folks who are teaching, have been supported during the pandemic with virtual technical assistance and professional development opportunities that there have been a lot of engagement with. And actually, I think there's been some learning for partners this year around the level of engagement with virtual opportunities. It's been high. And I think there's an interest in continuing to offer some kind of on-demand PD opportunities moving forward, even once we can be back in person, not to replace in-person professional development, but to be a supplement, just because it's more accessible. There have also been hazard pay bonuses for the teachers teaching in person this year. And Durham Pre-K and NC Pre-K parent satisfaction surveys and director and teacher surveys have gone out and will be complete by the end of this month. And we're happy to provide an update on perspectives of parents, teachers, and directors who've been engaged with the program. Next slide, please. There is a quality subcommittee of the Durham Pre-K Governance Committee. And this year they decided to focus on racial equity, their attention to racial equity as they do their work to kind of to consider how to best strengthen the quality of what is already a very high quality pre-K program. And I think that some of what has been lifted up in that quality subcommittee in the equity plan are opportunities to leverage ARPA dollars to address some equity issues with regard to access to the Durham pre-K program, and also to kind of who's teaching and how they're supported in the pre-K program. And some of those items that were included in the Durham pre-K equity plan, I'm sorry these aren't on your slide, I can submit revised slides with these items. But the equity plan focused on supporting access for before and after care for families. Lack of wrap care has been a barrier to some families. It's a 6.5-hour day and it follows the school schedule. So it would not allow by itself for a family where all adults are working full time. So that's an important issue. Increasing the number of Spanish-speaking teachers with a Latinx or Hispanic background, developing equity-based professional development plans for teachers and directors, and supporting the development of an anti-racist pre-K curriculum and lesson plans for the Durham pre-K classrooms. So again, those are some areas where we think we can leverage ARPA dollars and be on the lookout from a note from the governance committee to that end. Let's see, the other thing that is not on the list of the items that were in the equity plan is that there is an opportunity via ARPA dollars to potentially support pilots of half-day or 3-year-old programs. I know there was some discussion when Wake County announced that they were expanding to a 3-school program. So we do think the American Rescue Plan will be a strong source of funding for the ways that we would like to expand and enhance our Durham pre-K program with that vision of universality in mind. Next slide, please. I'm happy to take any questions about Durham pre-K now before I dive into my last 2 slides just about COVID impacts on our early care, our early care and education and our early childhood systems in general, and how our other ARPA dollars might be leveraged.
Could I, Chair Howard, can chime in and just make one quick comment?
Yes,
sure.
please.
One thing that I wanted to add, 2 quick observations, one of which is that I think you all are observing the value of having a well-placed, really smart employee in one of the key areas of county. Kate, adding more to this conversation than certainly I ever could have as the person who previously tried to carry some of these footballs. But second, there's one of the bedrock commitments of Durham pre-K is that we have started paying our pre-K teachers at the DPS pay scale. And that that relates to both the level of the local supplement and also years of seniority. And so there, even if we keep Durham pre-K at kind of a flat funding, there may be some adjustments that are required, both for sort of seniority and supplement reasons that may require, or we hope, may strongly suggest a small increase in the baseline funding for Durham pre-K so that we can continue with that commitment that has, I think, really helped us change, or at least start to change, the employment dynamics for early childhood teachers, which is a really important part of getting and keeping really good teachers in our pre-K system. Back to you, Kate.
I agree. Thank you so much for raising that, Drew. And I agree completely. I think the benefits of, the benefits of our pre-K program in Durham are not just child level benefits. There are really important benefits that we are seeing in our early care and education system overall, particularly as it relates to teacher compensation. And that's a big deal because it is a profession that is grossly underpaid. Thanks.
Mr. Jacobs.
Thank you. And just to echo what Drew just said, Kate, thank you for your great work. And it just gives me comfort to know that you're keeping track of all of this and keeping on top of this, because this has been, investing in early childhood and pre-K has been a priority of this board for many years. And when we get caught up in emergencies like the pandemic, we don't want to forget about the focus on making long-term upstream investments for systemic change to address inequities. I'm glad that you touched, Kate, on, I really appreciated the presentation about the ECAP and the thoughtfulness that's going into the structure for decision-making and also for funding. Because I think that's one of the things that our board wanted to make sure that we weren't creating another program that's just dependent on county funding, that we need to have other funding sources for this important work. And then related to that, related to the Durham pre-K, I know our funding is going to be relatively flat this year. I think it's 5.3 something million. And then as Drew mentioned, we really need to look at salaries, but has there been any discussion or have you had any thoughts about how we start to focus on a framework for long-term funding for Durham pre-K? Because it's the cost estimates are 20 million to fully fund Durham pre-K. And is that something that the ECAP has looked at? Just wanted to hear your thoughts about how do we look at, really funding that.
Yes.
For the long term.
Thank you so much for that question. Expansion of Durham pre-K is lifted up in the ECAP, and I think I think it's important to note that there is a role for philanthropic dollars in a pre-K program, but I do think that more stable kind of year-over-year funding that you would find locally or at the state level or federally are funding streams that are more appropriate for this type of program. And so I think we are being very attentive to the ways that the dollars are coming down federally to the state as a part of the American Rescue Plan, and considering that. And I think, I agree completely that there needs to be more thought to how do we make that move toward the universality that was the desire when the pre-K task force was established, and having conversations with additional partners about that. So I would say that those conversations are happening. I'm sorry that I don't have a better answer for you right now on sort of prospects for additional large amounts of funding beyond sort of what is in President Biden's plan around childcare and pre-K and around ARPA dollar usages.
Thank you, Kate. I'm glad that you all seem to be really on top of the federal and state funding. I just sent that email today to you about that. And so I'm really glad that you're on top of it and working with others on that. Thank you.
No problem.
Commissioner Burns?
Mine was, she tapped on it. I looked at Ed and C's report, and I did see how much, outside of, I always try to make sure I separate, what the president and Congress is doing for direct injection statewide and what we're doing from a county. And we did see that in the governor's recommendation that for childhood, well, it's $300 million in allocation for funds for sound basic education. But I think early childhood was like 101.5. So I want to go back to just so that we can continue this thinking around what Claudia presented in the beginning and making sure that we're looking at what our other stakeholders are doing. And, if we are able to get an injection from, the governor's office or from the state to partner up with our funds, let's make sure that we're not putting funds in buckets, right? You said, yeah, that they are. And then, who knows, we might hit that October 31 deadline and say, okay, the state's funds have ran out. Okay, let's use what we might have had for some of our ARPA funds and we can push this to 2026. So I think there's a way we can build upon this and everybody's ideas can be worked in together. So that was just my only thought.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Other
much.
questions from commissioners?
Brenda, I have my hand up. I don't know if you can see me.
I can with the, I'm strolling up and down with this presentation here. I can't see you. Go ahead.
Okay, thanks. I didn't want you to think I was having another moment.
Well, we have moments like that, so it's okay. Just go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Kate, thanks so much. I know you're not finished, but while I have you, I'll go ahead and just thank you for your leadership on this. And I really feel like this ECAP work is a model for what good planning and engagement looks like. And, just want to acknowledge that and also say that because of that, I want to invest, in the plan, and I want to just be sure we do set aside some dollars for that are local county dollars, in addition to all these other potential sources of funding that I know less about. And I'm so glad Commissioner Burns has a great handle on it, and we have Kate, we have you to think about it, and our own staff. But I felt very uncomfortable last year with flat funding. I guess I'm just making a statement now. I felt very, very uncomfortable with flat funding for Durham Pre-K last year. And I really don't want to have flat funding again this year. I really just, we began the process of having the Pre-K task force and all that maybe a decade ago. And, we have the great plan for how to, have universal Pre-K, work towards universal Pre-K. And I'd like for us to keep moving in that direction. I've always felt like this is one of our signature programs that I've felt the most proud of, and that I feel like has some of the biggest impacts on so many different areas that we measure, from everything from school success to health to employability in the future. I mean, there's so much research behind the benefits of Pre-K that I really hope we will consider putting some additional funding into it this year to both serve more kids and to support teachers and keep pace with Durham Public School salaries. And then there's the equity plan that sounds awesome. I hope that we'll have some money set aside for implementing some of their action steps. And then just the ECAP plan itself, as the implementation strategies become clearer, and the funding levels needed will become clearer. I hope that we'll have some money for real-time, implementation. And I'm really interested in expanding to 3-year-olds, and just, maybe we need a planning year for that and some dollars associated there to be sure we do some really good planning and engagement around that. But I really didn't have any questions. Sorry, I was making more of some statements that are just on my heart right now about this. Thank you.
Okay, if there are no more questions from commissioners, you want to move on?
Okay, well, commissioners, and thank you again, Kate, for all of your great work.
I'm so sorry, Manager Hager. I've got 2 more slides, if that's okay. I paused at the end of the. No, I'm sorry.
I thought I had something else.
Yes, I realized that I was kind of I'm talking about 3 related, but not the same topics. And so I kind of wanted to thank you. I'm so sorry.
No, take your time.
Thanks for all of your comments and support. I think to echo Director Rose from earlier in our presentation, I think in our funding recommendations around Durham Pre-K and around ECAP, we were trying to be very mindful of the impact of COVID on the county budget. But I do know that some infusion of dollars would do a lot for momentum for the partners that are engaged in both projects. So appreciate that very much. So just really quickly, I sent a memo that is more detailed about the COVID impacts on our early childhood systems here in Durham, and how to leverage some ARPA dollars, but I just thought I would kind of hit some of the highlights. In childcare itself, we have experienced some childcare closures in Durham, some permanent closures, and there is ongoing financial instability in that sector, as you can imagine, because enrollment in childcare has not returned to pre-pandemic levels, and operating childcare sites, the cost to operate them to be in compliance with the COVID safety guidelines has increased the cost of providing care significantly, over 40% for childcare centers and over 70% for family childcare homes. So that's just something to keep in mind. There are some staffing difficulties with the childcare centers that are open, and there are high levels of burnout being reported among staff. Folks who have been working in childcare, early childhood educators and staff are essential workers and have remained open during the pandemic. And I think it's been tough, you know, and trying to kind of care for children while all of that stress is on you as a worker and a professional is tough. And then also just acknowledging that because of the economic impact of COVID, some families have lost childcare subsidies when they lost jobs or have had trouble finding care when they do have a subsidy that kind of matches up with their family's needs. So there's just a number of things to keep in mind as it relates to our early care and education system in Durham, both related to the business people who are running those centers and homes, for the staff who are working, and for the families who are working to access care and continue to contribute economically. In kind of the health and child development sectors in our early childhood systems, rates of well child visit attendance and pediatric vaccination rates both decreased significantly during the pandemic, but those rates are rising back up and in some places are getting close to normal. So pediatric sites are working to catch up on vaccinations, but some of those kind of the well child visits and the opportunities for screening and for checking in with parents for support in some cases have just been lost. And so it's just important to acknowledge that. That there has been kind of less of that as parents were uncomfortable bringing their children in to be seen, particularly during the early part of the pandemic. There have been significant increases in parent and child mental health concerns due to isolation and economic stress and other COVID impacts. Some partners say there are significant wait lists for services and folks are never missing their appointments. Just because it is really needed right now. So additional capacity there would be helpful. There, as I mentioned, with regard to well child visit attendance decreasing, there have just been some delays in child assessment in general with the transition to the virtual, to doing virtual assessments in many cases. And families with children with special needs have just been particularly suffering with that transition and sort of lack of access. So I think just being aware of that is really important. And I think folks at the CDSA and in our at the DPS early childhood office are working hard. But I think it's just been tough with the transition to virtual. And then just wanted to lift up a couple other kind of essential service impacts. Diaper need has increased significantly, over 200% from pre-pandemic levels. And that's just something to be aware of. And I think there is potentially an opportunity to build in some funding for diaper provision into our county budget. There have been, as you all well know, increases in food and housing insecurity, but that stress is particularly harmful on our youngest children because of where they are at their phase in brain development. So as we're thinking about investments around food insecurity and housing insecurity, those are particularly impactful for our youngest kids just because of where they are in their brain development. And then just lifting up the virtual services, while, you know, across Durham and across our nation, the transition to virtual for many services has been like a Herculean effort, and people have been doing so much to transition the way they work and the way that they provide services. And it's something to really be applauded, but it's not accessible to everyone, or even if it is accessible, it's just not meeting the needs the way those in-person services were. So just being aware of that as well. Next slide, please. So I think here, I just wanted to name that, again, these broader investments with ARPA dollars around housing insecurity, food insecurity, workforce development, mental health services, financial assistance, there's a strong early childhood argument for making those investments, just because of the way that that supports our youngest children and the families that care for them, and that decreases that household stress, which can be harmful to brain development. So I think that's just important to keep in mind. I know you all are going to be doing a lot of consideration about how to draw down these funds and the best places for them, and those kind of broader investments have an early childhood I've lost my language, but they have an early childhood argument as well. But in addition to that, for the ARPA dollars that are coming to the county, there are some specific early childhood uses that I think would be really advantageous right now, including, as you've said, pre-K expansion, but also childcare subsidy expansion. It's worth noting that families that make a little bit too much to qualify for childcare subsidy are not able to afford market rate high quality early childhood education. So there's a large number of families, and these also represent a number of families on the wait list for Durham pre-K, families that don't qualify for NC pre-K or Head Start, don't qualify for subsidy, but whose household incomes are not conducive to paying for childcare. So that's an area of particular interest, I think, and importance right now. There's also opportunities to support peer navigation to access community resources, parent-child home visiting and therapy and parent education. These are some of those services that are kind of fully subscribed right now or have wait lists and could really benefit from additional expansion as we recover from COVID. There's also social emotional learning opportunities, funding for social emotional learning in childcare and in the early grades, as well as prenatal and postpartum mental health services. Postpartum depression and postpartum anxiety have seen increases during the pandemic because of isolation. And I think attentiveness to that issue is really important too. And I know that you all have lifted up disparities in maternal and infant health as a priority for you all too. That is lifted up strongly in the early childhood action plan as well. So I'm excited about that and agree totally about that focus. And then just finally, I think as we're thinking about ARPA dollars, I think there's kind of any number of kind of traditional nonprofits that would make great use of those funds. But I think it's also really important just to consider more community-rooted organizations and the folks who have lived experience and expertise, and in kind of being able to also direct some of those dollars to these to services that are culturally affirming and rooted in the communities and reflective of the communities they serve. I think there's just a really strong opportunity to do that here, both with ECAP and with ARPA dollars. So that is what I have on kind of early childhood system impacts and opportunities to leverage ARPA dollars. And I'm happy to take any more questions, and thanks for listening.
Thank you, Kate, for your presentation. Great presentation. Other questions from commissioners? Commissioner Jacobs.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, I guess just to follow up on some of the last issues that you raised, Kate, and thank you again. I know that we are going to continue funding for Reach Out and Read is in the budget, which has been a really important program related to the vaccinations and supporting families and literacy and, ACES. I didn't see the Wash and Learn funding in there. Is that going to still be funded, that program, or not?
It was recommended for funding. I actually have been, I am still on my learning curve about the budgeting process at the county, so I hope you all will forgive me, but I actually have been in the past week looking at the budget that was recommended and just trying to understand if all of the things that were in what I put forward for recommendation are actually in there, because they're not necessarily named. So I think that I definitely recommended it, and I think it's there just in kind of the early childhood budget broadly, and not pulled out as a specific program. But I'm working on confirming that that's the case.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. So if you could, we could just get confirmation on that
Yes.
program as well. And then when I was looking at the budget book, the performance measures for cooperative extension really highlighted exactly what you said, Kate. I know they've been one of the sources that have given out diapers, and also their Welcome Baby program. It was like through the roof. It was like 5,000 people, and then their food support, again, it was like through the roof. So I guess what would be helpful is some of the things that you mentioned, I guess, and I mean, maybe for you, Claudia, I think it would be good to get clarity about what is in this current budget related to early childhood supports, and if we do need to look at adding more funding, and if we, maybe through the ARPA, if it's not available through county dollars. I think I noticed that the Article 46 sales tax revenue was going to generate about $75,000 worth of additional pre-K funding. But it was something like that. It wasn't that much. So I didn't, again, some of the things that you've mentioned, because you mentioned a lot of things that really could use attention. So maybe we could get some recommendations for you related to immediate. But I think then there's the broader conversation of the later discussion that Claudia alluded to, when we look at what are the big kind of pots of transformational things that we want to look at, for our really big ARPA investments. And certainly things like mental health and, supporting our families and our children. It also ties into the Community Wellness and Safety Task Force as well. And what we're hearing from the community wanting us to really focus on mental health and, being trauma informed and addressing trauma and all that. So I don't know. So I don't know, do you have any thoughts, I guess, Claudia or Kate, about how we could follow up on this?
Well, from my perspective, we can coordinate with Kate and determine if there are some gaps, but also clarify what's in the budget so that we can make sure we can communicate that to the board, but we can do a follow-up on that.
And then I think to Commissioner Burns's point, what other state funding is out there, or federal funding that could help fund these things?
Exactly. And it's a great that there is an infusion of dollars in those areas. Yeah, many of y'all know my first part of my career was with Smart Start and this Partnership for Children. And so policy issues surrounding this issue is so important, because between that 0 to 5 age, that brain develops almost 80%, if not more. And I remember those stats when we used to go to the General Assembly and tout about why we needed to invest in vets so many years ago. But nevertheless, it is a high priority, and one that we will make sure from an infrastructure perspective that we look at what's coming down and how do we bridge those gaps to the extent that we can. And also, I know early on when we started this effort, thinking about, well, what kind of infrastructure is needed for us to start creating a capacity for more private funding to also offset this. And I know that requires, I remember this from my days in Smart Start, resources too, because program people can do one part, but we need to invest in resources for fundraising and to build those partnerships, or however we choose to do that. And so, so looking at a very comprehensive approach in how we move forward.
And also, Kate, I know you've had a conversation with DART, and I know that we're talking about mental health as well. So there's got to be some collaboration here, because everybody is talking about mental health. And there's got to be some collaboration, some mapping to find out where is the gaps, because we've got so many people in the community talking about it, but I'm just wondering, are we going to be overlapping stuff so I'd like to make sure that I know you guys are talking to each other. So just I'd like to hear what you come up with around that.
And definitely reach back out on that point. And yes,
Thank
Jess
you.
and I in particular are well connected, and with all of the different kind of subcommittees and committees that are working on this issue. So happy to follow back up on that
Yeah.
point specifically.
There's so many people in our community working on the issue. It's
Yes.
got to be some focal point. Otherwise, we need to be as efficient as possible with the dollars to make sure that we are providing the service where it's needed most.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions, concerns? I think that's the last thing on the agenda. And I'll toss it back to you, Claudia, to give us directions before we all scatter.
Great. At this point in time, we would entertain any questions. I know there are a few items that board members have asked for question-wise, and those are in process. We did send some out as far as answers to questions yesterday, and we can talk about those next week, because I know that was late when we sent those to you. We have a pretty full agenda for the sessions next week, and continue to let us know if there are questions. And like I say, we are in process of responding to some that are outstanding, but again, we'll take any questions that the board may have.
Whoa, no questions. Whoa.
Okay. But
How do you have to have one, at least one?
Well,
Hard to see, I guess.
Okay, Heidi, go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have one question. And I started thinking about it during the presentation, and Brenda, actually, when you were making your comments about all the different groups working on mental health and all the, just the community's interest in mental health right now, and the increase in need because of COVID when we already had tremendous need. I guess my question is there a way for staff to help us identify programs that we are already investing in that are working and that provide important, community support around mental health services, counseling, whatever? I mean, a couple come to mind that we might have considered a pilot in the past that now we want to scale up. I mean, one of those that comes to mind is our paramedicine program, for example. And another that comes to mind is the Emergency Behavioral Health Center. I guess I can't remember the name of it, but that Alliance actually runs with their funding, but some of that funding is from us. So anyway, that's my question, I think.
Right. And that's a great question. We actually, based on some individual discussions with each of you, have crafted a framework for just a policy conversation to share what we're doing right now and what's funded through the county.
Great.
And Jody can jump in, or Joanne, because they are the partners also with this, and we're working with the CJRC, of course, EMS, the Sheriff's Department. There may be some other partners, Alliance. So we are planning a coordinated conversation so that the board gets some sense of current investments. There will also be some discussion about the Stepping Up initiative work and the study that's proposed, and sort of what that looks like and what the time frame would occur for completion, and also some other components with that. So my apologies for not given that to the board more formally. But we have taken what you've said and we're trying to develop a strategy. I just didn't communicate back what that
sounds
was.
great.
That you did ask the question. Yes.
No, sounds great. And I should have thanked our staff for what they've already done. You know, the information that we received, the written information, that was very helpful as well. There's just more, and I'm thrilled. Thank you, Claudia. No apology necessary. Thank you that you're working on this framework for how to discuss it.
And Jody she popped on, she can weigh in, and hopefully I didn't overspeak or misrepresent anything.
Manager Hager, no, you didn't. I just wanted to share with the board on our June 3rd budget work session, we'll be talking about behavioral health infrastructure. Part of that will be providing the board an update to the summary list that we provided last week of the current services and programs that are provided or funded by the county. Gundren has offered to come and walk us through some of the work that the Stepping Up initiative is doing. Also talk about opportunities to update their report and study that they did about 2 years ago as it works in collaboration with some of the other discussions and some of the other work that's happening in the community around safety and wellness in Durham, specifically around mental health services. She's going to walk the board through the interceptor mapping strategy and process for how to go about doing the hard work of really understanding what are the existing resources we have in the community and identifying those gaps. And then we'll also be able to have a discussion with the board about other services and programs that we may look towards moving forward. Specifically, one of the first steps may be looking at putting some resources toward updating the Stepping Up Initiative report and making sure that's current as a valuable resource. So we'll have that conversation. We've invited representatives from DSS, Public Health, CJRC, the sheriff and his team will be joining us from the Alliance. So we'll have a variety of stakeholders who will be attending our work session on June 3rd to be part of the conversation as we talk about just providing the board an overview, but also possibly what might be some next steps looking at next year's budget that we could take to move forward in these conversations and start really understanding what some of the gaps in services may be.
Great. All right. Thank you, Jody.
You're welcome.
Any other questions from commissioners or staff? So if there's nothing else, we can adjourn.
Commissioner Howerton, this is Keith Lane. I'm sorry.
Okay, Keith.
I just wanted to answer a quick question that Commissioner Jacobs asked about Reach Out and Read. We are currently funding $50,000 for Reach Out and Read. I believe that's the same amount we budgeted last year. So just wanted to answer that question real quick. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
I'm sorry, Keith, it wasn't Reach Out and Read, it was Wash and Learn.
Oh, we're still checking on that one. Hold on. We'll get that one to you in an email. Sorry, thank you.
Okay, so our next budget meeting is just for the public. You want to announce that? Manager Hager?
Yes, hold on one second. Let me pull, and Keith or David, they may have, it's on June 1st and it begins at 9 o'clock.
Okay.
It is 9 o'clock till 4:30 on June 1st, and then following up on Thursday, June 3rd at 1:30 until 5.
Okay, all right. Well, listen, I think we can adjourn. I don't think we need a motion. We just adjourn and have a good weekend.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good holiday weekend, everybody.
Bye-bye.